Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about What If Naruto x Superman Justice League Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Clouds were slightly damp wisps of air that rushed past her body. She was falling. The pressure on her body pushing her downward awakened her up. Green eyes flickered open. The lashing of the wind made it difficult to keep her eyes open, but somehow she managed. Upon regaining consciousness, it took her 3.5 seconds to assess her current situation. She wasn't where she had been previously. In fact, she was in the sky when she hadn't been when she was last conscious. Most importantly, she was falling with impending doom on the horizon if she didn't do something. It took her another 5 seconds to realize there wasn't anything she could do to save herself. She knew of nothing in the ninja arts that could stop someone from falling when there was nothing close by able to break their fall. It took her another minute to call for the one person who inadvertently helped her out of every tight spot she'd been in her entire life. A part of her thought it was shameless to depend still on him like she had when she was a child, but the other more rational part of herself that wanted to live did what she had to do. Naruto. Her voice was carried away by the wind and she hoped against hope for some miracle to save her. Sakura squeezed her eyes shut and was thereafter surprised when her body jarred. She initially suspected that was her body breaking on the ground, but since she felt no pain, only minor discomfort, she ruled that out. The only logical thing to do was to open her eyes, and since she no longer felt the disorienting sensation of falling, she'd opened her eyes only to find herself looking at a rather beautiful profile. She was in a pair of arms. Strong arms that were holding her securely. Sakura chanced to glance around her, noting that she was still among the clouds, yet she was no longer falling. There was only one conclusion that she could draw as to why that was, but she wasn't crazy yet, so she pushed it to the back of her mind. Who are you? He looked at her for the first time with curiosity etched in his features. He smiled at her then, and Sakura felt her heart flutter a little, but he didn't answer immediately, which caused Sakura to frown, but as she suddenly realized they were descending to the ground, she allowed herself to accept the truth. They had been flying. Flying. In her lifetime Sakura had seen a fair number of jutsu, but she could never once say that she had seen someone fly. Had she been saved by the gods? Was he a god? When they touched the ground and he lowered her to her feet, she asked him that very question. Were you sent by the gods to save me? His brow arched incredulously at her question, yet Sakura waited patiently for an answer. After all, she deserved one. She would have died if he hadn't intervened, and that meant something to her. Though, it would likely mean something to anyone. Most people did value their lives. I'm not from the gods. I'm just Superman. I save people. It was evident that he thought his words made perfect sense, but to Sakura, they made him sound like a slight lunatic. No one who happened to be able to fly was just super. He inclined his head to the side as if he heard something. His brows furrowed and he turned back to her. I must go. People need my help. He planned on leaving her without a second thought. It wasn't something that sat well with her. In fact, if she was honest, something akin to panic settled in her chest. Surely, him catching her was some sign they should stay together to figure out what was going on. Wait. You can't just leave me here. Where am I? What happened to me? Where's Naruto and Sasuke? What's going on with the war? Alarm and indecision briefly flickered through his eyes, and Sakura somehow knew he was trying to prioritize what was more important. The people who needed his help now were her. If the people he planned on going to help were in a dire situation as she had been, then she knew there was a significant probability that he would leave her behind. So to forestall such a notion, she set her plan in motion. Take me with you. I can help you. He looked skeptical. Although, that was understandable since he had just saved her from falling from the sky. It probably appeared to him that she could do very little. However, Sakura knew her worth now. If there were lives to save, then it wasn't far-fetched that he'd need her around. I'll be okay on my own. She expected that sort of answer, but Sakura was stubborn, so she wasn't going to back down easily. I don't doubt that. However, I can't just let you go. You saved my life when you have no obligation to me. Because of that, you seem trustworthy. I might not find another person like you. There's no telling what harm could befall me for trusting the wrong person. So, please, take me with you. Just this once. He hesitated briefly before taking her into his arms once more and pulling her close to his chest. Sakura shivered at the contact. Hold on. We'll have to move quickly. Sakura did as she told and was glad she had the common sense to use chakra to hold on to him tightly because the time it took for Naruto to finish a bowl of ramen was eclipsed by his speed. Her face was grim as they flew through the skies. She didn't question the novelty of it, not immediately though, but she couldn't help but think it was quite the unusual ability. A Kekai Genkai perhaps. When they came closer to reaching their destination, the clear skies grew darker, heavier, drearier, and ominous. As the first raindrop hit her face, she inwardly groaned. Seconds later the single droplet became multiple ones, and water ran down her face and into her eyes, obscuring her vision, which was unfortunate as she was just getting used to keeping her eyes open and moving at such rapid speeds. Her hair became plastered to her face in a way that was far from fetching, then a chill settled into her bones, causing Sakura to move closer to the man that held her in his arms. He was warm. As they landed, Sakura realized that she was no longer in the 5 shinobi nations. This man and his talents were not something that could be hidden. He was in no bingo book that she knew of, not to mention that nothing around her looked like anything she had ever seen before. She would go so far as to say that even the sky was a different shade of blue than what she was accustomed. All in all, it wasn't her homeland. A brief hand of fear grabbed her, but she pushed it aside as concern took hold of her. There was no visible land, yet she could tell by the homes partially submerged by water that there used to be. Her savior looked about, plainly concerned about something, when she heard a cry for help. He looked torn, which Sakura didn't understand at all. "Put me down and go help." He no longer held her bridal style, but rather held her so that her feet were dangling below her just above the water. It was somewhat awkward being so close to a stranger, but as he had made no ill-mannered moves, Sakura dealt with it. But the water. Sakura looked down at the water, wondering what was wrong with it, and then she remembered she wasn't in her world. Things were bound to be different, and if they weren't, then she wouldn't have felt so out of place. He didn't know her just as she didn't know him. She would have to show him a little of what she could do. After all, she knew a little of what he could do. It's just water. Besides, you carried me all the way here. I have plenty of energy to do something as simple as walking on water. Before he could protest any further, Sakura nimbly slipped out of his grasp and landed on top of the water. He appeared stunned, and Sakura almost chuckled. She could imagine that's how she looked at him when he caught her falling from the sky. "I look for people to the east. You go west." With that, she dashed off, searching for survivors of the flood. Superman didn't have time to dwell on her departure or why she could walk on water. He had people to save. Still, he was a little amazed, which was something coming from him. Sakura's feet tapped lightly on the water as she moved quickly, shouting, asking if anyone could hear her. She sent chakra to her ears to see if she heard any replies, and after several minutes she heard one. "Help. Someone, please help." Sakura increased her speed, running towards the voice. "Keep talking so I can find you." At Sakura's shout, the female in need of help immediately kept calling for help, enabling Sakura to reach her faster. What she found, upon her arrival, was a woman with blonde hair holding a male child in her arms, struggling to stay above the water. The child appeared to be unconscious, but somehow Sakura knew it was a little more than that. Sakura reached out a hand and pulled the woman and child up out of the water. The woman looked vaguely surprised at her actions, but her primary concern was the child that she clutched securely to her bosom. Sakura, without a second thought, picked them both up and headed for high ground so that she could see if there was anything she could do for the child. "Lay him down." The woman didn't seem to hear as she only clutched the boy tighter. Sakura, knowing every second was precious, barely restrained herself from yelling at the woman. However, she knew why the woman was behaving the way she was. Friends had died in her arms during the war, and holding them kept you from accepting their death readily. So instead, she coaxed the child from her arms, assuring her that if the woman let her, she could help. Sakura, while accessing her patient, began firing questions at the woman as to what happened. Her voice was shaky as she told her that he had gotten caught on something while the flooding was occurring and couldn't get out. She had dived in several times trying to get him free, but by the time she had, he was unconscious. Sakura set out immediately to remove the water from the boy's lungs. Superman, having witnessed her saving the young child's life, realized she was capable of managing the task at hand. Anyone who he found that was injured or needed help he brought to her, and she healed them. He couldn't help but realize how well they worked together. They saved many lives. After all was said and done, the people were safe, and they were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. They finally spoke to each other. Sakura's tongue darted out over her dry, cracked lips. She couldn't recall the last time she had anything to eat or drink, but that was a problem for another occasion unless, of course, she passed out. But what were the odds of that happening? Where am I? It was the first question that came to her mind, as well as the most important. Superman didn't seem to want to reply as he answered her question with a question. "Are you injured?" His concern was blatantly written across his face, and she had dived into a few dangerous situations to save a few lives, and that was the reason she didn't become upset at his evasion. However, she did find her heart was pounding rapidly as she knew that the answer, when it came, would be something that she was not pleased with. "I'm fine, but I need to know where I am so I can figure out how to get home." She opted to be reasonable and even injected a small note of begging in her voice and pleading in her eyes. His whole demeanor changed at her gesture, and he stepped a little closer to her in a manner that was decidedly protective. Right this second we're in Bangladesh, however, you were falling from the sky right above Japan. Sakura racked her brain recalling the geography of the 5 shinobi nations. In the academy, she had been good at geography and memorizing things. She had aced the test and was confident that as time passed, she hadn't forgotten anything. And yet still, she knew neither of the places he had mentioned, which was worrisome. I don't know these places. I have never heard of them. Then where are you from? His voice was calm, soothing. The Kunoichi thought he was doing it on purpose to keep her from breaking down. She wasn't going to, not yet at least. She'd save that for when she had a moment or two of privacy. Anahagakure, the Hidden Leaves Village. Sakura raised her hand and touched her forehead, protected the only proof she had that she wasn't crazy. And I have to get back as soon as possible. He didn't reply immediately. He stared at her, through her, deep in thought. It was a while before he finally spoke again. Come with me. I think I may know of someone who can help you. Sakura nodded her head eagerly and allowed him to sweep her off her feet. She fell asleep in his arms as he flew away with her. Sakura had no idea why she trusted him so much. He had done very little to earn that trust, except catch her as she fell from the sky. Still, that didn't stop her from letting her body shut down as the trauma of the day caught up with her. She didn't feel his eyes as they rested upon her in her slumber. Superman, for his part, could admit that he had seen his fair share of odd things in his life. After all, he was an alien from another planet. Normal was something that at times he felt was beyond him. Yet he had no idea where she had come from or why she had fallen from the sky. When he caught her, he had seen no place that she could have fallen from. A few jokes about angels filtered through his brain, but he doubted she'd find them amusing. Still, she was beautiful enough to be an angel, or at the very least otherworldly. Her hair was a soft pink, giving her a delicate, almost fragile appearance. Her eyelashes were long and were dusted with silver. Not to mention her eyes grew greener when she was focused on saving lives. She was a tiny little thing. Since he towered over her, if he had to guess, he would say she wasn't much taller than 5 feet. Superman made a vain attempt to pull his mind off the woman in his arms, only to find his thoughts drifting to her once more. He had been amazed when he saw her stand on water as if it were solid ground. That was something that not even he could do. Sure, he could hover above it, but he was certain that she actually stood upon the water. Was she an alien from another planet? Did she get her power from the yellow sun as he did? What was Konohagakure, or rather where was it? From what he saw, she had a strength that no human that he knew of had. She could, at the very least, lift her own body weight. He had seen her pull the woman in Bangladesh out of the water, as if she were light as a feather. She couldn't be just an ordinary human. Was she a metahuman? That still didn't explain why she was falling from the sky in an area where no one else was around to have dropped her. Superman frowned and diverted his attention away from the girl and back to where he was going. Although those thoughts were significantly worse. Why, of all people, did he think to go to Lois first? Before he knew it, he was lowering them to the ground in Metropolis. They hadn't reached his intended destination as he no longer thought it was the wisest of ideas. Lois had her own lover, her own life, and it didn't include him. He couldn't just barge in on her and expect her to help him. Besides, he had a lot of experience with reporters. Even if Lois had moved on to television, she was still a reporter and could smell a story a mile away and knew that this was a story that she wouldn't be able to let go of. He didn't want the young woman to be exploited. In the short amount of time he had spent with her, Superman found that he was very protective towards her. He stood in the streets as the sun began to set in Metropolis with a small bundle in his arms, vaguely confused as to what he should do and how he should help her. His initial plan had frayed at the edges and unraveled, and he had no backup plan. It was then that he realized that he didn't even know her name. Her body shifted and she began to stir, moving restlessly in his arms. When her eyes opened, he found that he was staring at her. Her cheeks flushed and she looked away from him and at their surroundings, and he knew he had crossed some sort of invisible line. He looked away from her, missing the relief on her face at his action. Are we there yet? Her voice was groggy and she rubbed her eyes sleepily. Superman chuckled as many a child had asked that question in their youth. He couldn't help but return his gaze to her as the comparison brought a thought to his mind. She looked so very young. So young that he was suddenly uncomfortable with holding her close in his arms. Sakura, upon realizing that they were on land, wiggled in his grasp until he set her on her feet. Where are we? Is your friend somewhere around? She turned her head left and right, her lips pursed in confusion as there was no one about. They only stood on a quiet, deserted street. Superman prepared himself to respond, but then remembered that he didn't know her name. They worked together to save lives, and he hadn't even bothered to ask her name, a basic common courtesy. He opened his mouth to correct that error, but before the opportunity had completely arisen, she interrupted with a question of her own. Is that normal? Personally, she didn't think it was, but she had a feeling that wherever she was, it wasn't anything like home, so her definition of normal could technically be thrown out the window. It looked like a spider, but it was missing a few legs and a whole lot bigger. It held a cube in what she would guess to be its antennae. Her lips curled in disgust at the sight. She wasn't a fan of insects, bugs, or anything that crawled, but she typically tolerated them since she considered Shino a friend. However, some things should never be allowed into existence like human-sized bugs. Superman turned and looked at what had caught her attention and frowned, realizing that what he was gazing upon was not human. Trouble. He murmured before telling her to stay where she was. He didn't listen to her reply, but instead followed said trouble into an old building. The creature was holding a box in its antenna as it walked about searching quietly for something. "What are you doing?" Superman asked to draw the attention of the creature who, in turn, hissed at him. It wasn't a pretty hiss. In fact, it made it uglier than it had already been, similar to some people when they cry. The creature's many legs turned and ran in his direction, and it didn't look like it was going to suggest they sit down for a spot of tea and crumpets. Superman raised his fists and waited patiently for the creature to reach him when a blur of pink that he immediately identified as his temporary companion appeared in front of him, letting out a war cry of "Shanro." It flew backward at the blow she delivered but was up and running again seconds later. A sliver of dread crept up Superman's spine. "Get out of here." Her head snapped in his direction at his command, and her face twisted in anger as she made a bold proclamation. "I'm not leaving you." He didn't know how to feel about that and didn't have time to analyze the matter. Instead, Superman decided to take a chance. She had the ability to walk on water. She was able to lift more than her body weight. With her petite frame, she was able to knock the creature more than half her size clear across the room. When attacked, she didn't show fear, but stood her ground. That either meant she had the strength to back up her play or that she was insane. A part of him thought she was just insane, but the evidence was pointing to the contrary. He scooped her up in his arms and threw her out the entrance of the building, hoping against hope that she would land safely. It was a good thing he did, though, because soon the creature was upon him, swinging its blade-like legs, effectively tearing his uniform in a place or two. Before he had the chance to counterattack, the box and the creature that held it exploded. The creature let out a loud cry, but Superman, seeing what was about to happen, knocked the box out of its grasp and threw his body over the creature, subduing the explosion with his body. That didn't stop the room from erupting into flames due to the other explosion caused by the box he had carelessly knocked away. Superman stood quickly and accessed the situation. He needed to put out the fire, and quickly. The area was inhabited and people could be harmed if he didn't react quickly enough. There was no sprinkler system as the building was an older one. His companion chose that moment to run back into the burning building. Superman wondered briefly if she had a habit of running to trouble instead of away from it, and if she did, how had she lived as long as she had. He heard her call for him and he moved to get her out once more, but he heard her say, "Water style. Water dragon bullet technique." The flames began to die down as they were doused with water from an unknown origin. Smoke filled the area, but he had no trouble making his way to her side. When she finished extinguishing the flames, he couldn't stop the question that came to mind. "What are you?" "Don't you mean who?" She smiled cheekily at him, her face dripped with sweat, presumably from the heat of the flames. "I'm Sakura, if I didn't mention it before. It's nice to meet you." "So what was that about? Was it an enemy of yours?" Her tone was casual, but she was actually very curious. He didn't seem like a man that anyone would want to make an enemy out of, but stranger things had happened. Not to mention the fact that whatever it was that attacked them didn't look human. As she came closer to it and touched it with her own hands, she was prone to thinking that its appearance in this world was about as odd as hers was. Was it some type of machine? Sakura's brain struggled to process what was happening, but she didn't think she was doing a very good job. Too much happened to her too swiftly. She needed more time to process the situation, but she had a bad feeling she wasn't going to get it. He didn't answer her, but rather looked carefully around the room as if he was searching for something. Sakura didn't know what he could possibly be looking for, let alone see, as it was dark in the building, with only a little light illuminating the inside of the building due to the earlier explosion, so she didn't bother to help him. Instead, Sakura found herself wandering closer to the outside as something out of the corner of her eye caught her attention. Darkness blanketed the sky without her realizing it, and yet not a star was in sight. That was something that was unheard of in Konoha. You could always see the stars, and Sakura realized it was something she had taken for granted. Here the sky was like a blank canvas waiting to be painted upon. Sadness filled her momentarily until she focused on the green glow that illuminated the sky. It was by no means a star, but didn't make her any less curious as to why it was moving closer to where she and her super companion were located at a steady speed. Sakura sent a small wave of chakra to her eyes in order to enhance her vision, and what she saw astounded her. Two men encased in green light were flying in the skies. What was with this world and the ability to fly? Was it some sort of prerequisite? Sakura's eyes narrowed when they landed silently not too far away from where she was. If she hadn't been covertly watching the whole scene she wouldn't have noticed their presence at all. Sakura's eyes narrowed knowing that their appearance was no coincidence. Sakura raised her head when she felt someone come closer to her and found herself looking at her super friend's visage. She frowned when she realized he looked angry and she didn't think that anger was directed at her, or rather she hoped it wasn't, seeming as though he stood in the fire and came out unscathed. Literally. She couldn't do that. She wasn't even sure she wanted to. Sakura enhanced her hearing, catching the end of the conversation between the two men. "Can handle this." Before Sakura could question him about what was going on, Superman flew outside, becoming a red and blue blur and knocked the man dressed in green backward. "I don't handle easily." Sakura, looking at how hard Superman had hit the guy, had to agree. The kunoichi slipped out of the building, sticking to the shadows as the attention wasn't on her, which suited her just fine. Green Lantern's eyes widened as he flew backward from the unexpected blow. He mused that he probably should have been a bit quieter, but it was too late for that as he already had an infuriated alien on his hands. His back slammed against the side of a car, making an indentation of his body in it, as well as busting the glass. A few shards sliced his cheek, and he raised a hand to wipe the blood that trickled down his face away. Lantern picked himself up off the ground, cursing silently as Superman packed one hell of a punch. It was amazing that he hadn't broken anything. He supposed this was one of those moments where being a Green Lantern came in handy. After Green Lantern had shaken himself from his daze, he realized that Batman had managed to get into a bit of trouble trying to hold off Superman until he was ready to get back into the game. "You can't subdue me, Batman. You're just an ordinary human with a few toys. Toys that you're almost out of. I don't need to subdue you. I just need to keep you distracted for a little while." Green Lantern took that as his cue to intervene. By will, a large dragon appeared and flew through the air, rushing in Superman's direction. Lantern saw Superman turn his head his way and narrow his eyes, but he was too late to stop his dragon from swallowing him whole, encasing him in his light prison. "Batman, are you Aurig?" Before he could complete his question, his dragon was shattered to pieces and Superman stood in the aftermath looking angrier than he had at first. Green Lantern didn't suppose that was a good sign, but he wasn't about to give up yet. "Cute," Superman muttered before rushing him. Green Lantern mused that perhaps it was time to phone a friend. The battle between the three men was intense, although it appeared to Sakura that the one in black didn't want to fight at all. She debated for a while whether or not to enter the fray that was rapidly getting out of hand. Buildings were being destroyed, and Sakura could see people running for cover and decided that she would have to intervene for the sake of the people who were getting caught in the crossfire of some male testosterone bullshit. She was reminded of Sasuke and Naruto and wondered when she got home if she was going to have to put up with that type of thing for the rest of her life. The future suddenly looked bleak. A red blur joined the fray, moving as fast as lightning against her savior. He taunted the Superman, saying that he wouldn't be able to hit him, but Superman proved him wrong with a flick of his finger, very little effort, and a smug smile. Sakura bit back a snicker and decided then enough was enough. Just as Superman and the Green One were about to come to blows, Sakura threw herself between the two, not realizing that she wasn't the only one who had such an idea. The Dark One stood in front of her holding his arms out to the two men. He looked over his shoulder at her, obviously wondering where she had come from and what she was doing. However, she had better things to do than to answer his unspoken questions. "Stop this," Sakura said, her attention focused wholly on the man she had met earlier that day, the man she had saved lives with. The Superman. "I've only known you for a short period of time, but this mindless destruction, can you tell me that this is you? People are running for their lives afraid because of you. I thought you saved people instead of making them fear you. Did you lie to me? Is this who you truly are?" Superman looked down at Sakura and slowly his stance relaxed and a contrite look crossed his face. "She's right, Superman. Green Lantern and I didn't come here to fight." Sakura was beginning to wonder about the odd names and slowly began to assume they were code names unless someone's mother was a little too creative when passing out baby names. "We were attacked just like you were. Green Lantern says they were aliens just like you. We were hoping that you knew something about them." "You're an alien?" Sakura asked, looking at Superman in a new light. She never believed in such things. They were things you found in books and on television. Not in real life. He had to have it wrong. But then again, he could fly, was obviously strong, could withstand fire, and was able to take on three men at one time. That didn't mean anything, though. She was strong, and if her chakra wasn't halfway depleted from all the healing she had done earlier, then she'd be able to take on three men at once as well. At that thought, Sakura's hand drifted down to the pouch she kept on her hip to make sure it was still there. She had a feeling she'd need a few of the soldier pills she kept inside of it. "Who's the girl?" the dark stranger asked. "Who are you?" Sakura countered before Superman could reveal her name. The red blur came through and asked if they were still fighting. Once he determined they weren't, he began to evacuate the area. Sakura thought it was funny in a not really sort of way that they began evacuating the people after they finished the mindless destruction. Well? Sakura watched as his lips twitched slightly. I'm Batman, this is Green Lantern, the guy in the red is the Flash. And you? Kanoichi. Sakura felt Superman's eyes on her, but she didn't return his stare. She didn't know these people, and now she felt like perhaps she trusted Superman a little too quickly by giving her name, even if it wasn't her full one. She wasn't about to make that mistake again. She just hoped her instincts about the man was correct and he didn't reveal the little that he knew about her. You're a ninja. Sakura nodded, wondering how Batman knew that so quickly as it looked like the Green Lantern and Superman were still puzzled. She didn't ask, though, because she somehow felt that doing so would give him the upper hand. Can we get back to the subject at hand? Sakura glanced at the Green Lantern after he posed his question and then at Superman and still felt a bit of tangible hostility between the two. She hoped another fight didn't break out. Truthfully, all she really wanted to do was go home, but she couldn't exactly leave, especially since Superman was the only one she trusted enough to help her get there. I haven't seen any creatures like that before today, but the one I did see had one of those things you have in your hand, Batman. I think it blew up when he did. Sakura glanced at the item in Batman's hand and vaguely recalled seeing it before Superman threw her out of the building. She still couldn't believe he had done that. She had been protected from danger before, but to be forcibly tossed out of it, well, she didn't know whether or not to be irritated or amused at his audacity. In the end, as Sakura wandered back to the area where she and Superman fought the creature to make sure the box was well and truly gone, she decided that she'd be amused. As Sakura scanned the dark building, she decided it wouldn't hurt to double-check and make sure that the cube was gone. She hated to be unprepared for the unexpected. Sakura walked into the dark building, remembering that she couldn't see a thing. With an irritated sigh, Sakura rolled her eyes at herself. She turned her head and peered outside to see if anyone was nearby. There were no able bodies in her field of view, so she raised her voice, hoping someone would hear her. Anyone have a light? After calling out, she immediately turned her attention back to the room, trying to remember where she exchanged blows with the creature, hoping to find some remnants of it that would give some sort of clue as to what was going on. When a large light flooded through the area, Sakura's eyes grew large. She hadn't expected that much support. In truth, she hadn't expected any sort of response at all, since they all seemed to be so absorbed in each other. She turned her head and looked behind her to see who had lent a helping hand, only to realize that she couldn't see anything. Turning and facing the light was blinding. A loud, unfamiliar sound filled her ears like someone was trying to beat the air into submission, caused Sakura to raise a hand and touch her aching ears briefly. What's going on? When she received no response, she found herself running outside to see what the commotion was about. She opened her mouth to call out to Superman, but she felt herself being grabbed and pulled along. She squinted her eyes and noted that it wasn't Superman's arms that held her, the man was smaller and leaner than Superman was, so she began to fight to be free, earning a few ouches and groans. But no sort of retaliation came at her blows. Sakura decided it would probably be smart to see who it was that grabbed her. It was the Green Lantern that held her closely, and while it felt really nice in his arms, she wasn't that type of girl, so she began her struggles anew. He didn't hit her, instead, he tightened his grip, making it difficult for her to breathe. Stop, we have to get out of here. We can do that with you keeping your hands to yourself. Yeah, but then they'll see you. Sakura frowned, wondering who they were and why he was shielding her from view. Was he protecting her? Sakura shook her head, knowing that couldn't be possible. He didn't know her at all, so why would he go to such lengths? They've seen us. We need to leave now. The Batman's statement made her uneasy. Sakura pulled away from Green Lantern, who let her go after she stepped on his toe, and moved over to the Batman and Superman, who weren't standing that far apart. Who are we running from? Them? Batman pointed to the sky to see something else flying in the sky. Sakura pursed her lips. That really didn't tell her who they were running from, so she naturally assumed it was trouble. Of course, Sakura muttered and shook her head. What do we need to get away? A distraction and a route. Sakura glanced to her left, then her right, frowned, then said, I'll take care of it. Gather the others and get ready to run. What are you going to do? Superman's question sounded vaguely suspicious. She could understand that. The whole situation was suspicious to her, but she was going to go with it because she wasn't about to be detained for no reason, because the only reason they would need to run was if capture was imminent. I'm going to provide a distraction. It was obvious upon first meeting her that she was with Superman. Even when she threw herself in between them, it was obvious that if it ever came down to picking sides, she'd pick Superman's every time. Still, Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, couldn't help but be curious about her. She called herself Kinoichi, but he had heard of no such person. Batman had said she was a ninja, yet as far as he knew ninja were assassins for hire, and yet when he looked at her petite frame and large green eyes he didn't think killer, but maybe that was the point. He found himself amazed at how quickly she single-handedly diffused all the tension in Superman with just a few words. Were they a couple? For some reason, he didn't think so. Superman held himself aloof like he was alone in the whole world. There was an impenetrable aura surrounding him that made you wary of trying to cross him. Even standing next to him seemed taboo. They weren't a couple. Hal smiled. That meant she was fair game. Don't even think about it. Green Lantern turned his head and looked at the Flash innocently. Think about what? She's too young. She shouldn't even be out here with us. She's a grown woman, Flash. No girl has a body like that. Not to mention no girl carries herself the way she does. Flash shook his head slowly at Green Lantern's reply, knowing well that girls matured a lot faster nowadays. Hal spent entirely too much time on other planets. It was a situation that could only end badly. It didn't take a high IQ to figure that one out. Still, he had to say something to him. You're asking for trouble. Green Lantern turned and looked at Sakura, whose fingers moved rapidly for some reason he couldn't fathom, and said, I certainly am. A few moments after Sakura's fingers stopped moving, the helicopters that were moving in on them suddenly changed direction. Green Lantern's eyes grew large in surprise, knowing then that Kinoichi couldn't just be some killer for hire. Or was it a coincidence that the helicopters changed direction? What did she do? Batman, who was suddenly behind him, answered, causing Hal to whirl around to face him. He was a little creepy, this Batman, and the honest truth was he wanted to leave him behind as soon as possible. She provided a distraction. But how? What did she do? Doesn't matter. What's important is that we get out of here. Now. Sakura looked at Superman, who was paying more attention to what Batman was saying than what she was doing. Sakura had half a mind to listen in on what he found so curious, but she couldn't afford to waste chakra as she was getting tired. Superman, I need you to break the ground so that we can escape that way. We don't need to go with them. I'm not like them and neither are you. Come with me and I'll help you find a way home. His offer was tempting. She had no idea what was going on in this world and she figured being a part of it would be messy. Yet if what she was gathering from the others was true, then things were going to get worse. Someone was placing explosives throughout the cities without a care as to what happened to those who got caught in the crossfire. How could she not help if they were trying to save lives? She was a medic after all, and she wouldn't be able to live with herself if she didn't do what she could to help until she was able to make it home. Besides, if she left, Naruto would be disappointed in her. No, I'm not like them. You're right. Just like neither are you, but just because that's true doesn't mean we should turn our back on doing what's right. I want to help them. I want to work at their sides and save lives just like we did earlier today. Sakura extended her hand. So are you with me? With us, Batman interjected, and Sakura glanced around at their motley group and smiled. That's right. With us. A smile graced Superman's lips and he shook his head slightly and took Sakura's offered hand, briefly giving it a small squeeze before letting go. Sakura jumped when she heard a loud bang and turned in the direction of the sound. The Green Lantern stood next to a large hole in the ground that he had obviously created. He looked impossibly arrogant, yet she couldn't help but think he was more than capable of backing up that arrogance. Sakura wondered about his background briefly, but it wasn't the time for background stories, which was confirmed by Green Lantern's next words. I hate to interrupt the love fest, but we should probably get going. The truth was he didn't care if he did interrupt said love fest, since that had been his intention all along, but that wasn't information they needed to know. Batman's eyes narrowed slightly before he confirmed Green Lantern's statement. He's right. Let's move. Batman, thereafter, jumped into the opening within the ground first. Sakura heard a splash indicating that there was water beneath them. Sakura hesitated instead of following after Batman, so Green Lantern went next. Eventually, Sakura followed him, landing on top of the water instead of mucking about in it. Sakura's nose furrowed as the smell hit her, and she was suddenly glad she decided to land on top of the water. She had a bad feeling before she jumped that it wouldn't be water she'd willingly drink. Not to mention she'd never be able to get that smell off her skin. She wasn't the prima donna of her youth, but she was still a girl who didn't want to smell like gorillas in the mist. You walk on water too? Sakura looked at Green Lantern and shrugged since the answer was obvious. He waited for some sort of reply, and for a second she wondered if he could help her get home. Could she trust him like she trusted Superman? He had, after all, tried to shield her from view earlier, and although it wasn't much, well, she could tell him a little without risking the safety of Konoha, couldn't she? This is normal where I come from. Where do you come from? That was the question. Truthfully, she didn't know the answer anymore. In such a short amount of time, she had discovered so much. There were other worlds besides her own. There were at least 3 planets that she knew of that sustained life. Her homeworld, the planet she currently inhabited, and the place where Superman came from. Inoichi, you're not from Earth, are you? Sakura frowned at Green Lantern's probing and glanced at Superman, who slightly shook his head unbeknownst to their curious companion. Sakura slightly inclined her head in acknowledgement to Superman's warning. Sakura's brow furrowed, trying to think of a way to dodge the question that had been posed to her. In the end, the solution was a simple one. Sakura stared into the lantern's eyes and then smiled prettily. You wouldn't believe me even if I told you. Sakura decided to play it lightly because if she flat out refused to give him an answer he'd believe she was hiding something she was, but she didn't want him to know that. Try me. He smiled winsomely at her, and if Sakura didn't know better she'd swear he was flirting. Although, if she were honest, he was probably just responding to her own distracting flirtatious behavior. Sakura didn't try him. She merely returned his smile, unaware that he thought it made her mysterious and all the more appealing. The Kunoichi, deciding it was time to break away from the curious green light, moved to Superman's side as they trudged forward. He nodded slightly at her, recognizing her purpose in moving closer to him. Green Lantern didn't seem too keen on being near Superman for some reason, which probably had something to do with a beating he had received far too recently, and it was something that she was going to take advantage of. After they had traveled for quite some time, in a low voice, she asked the question that was on her mind, since Superman shook his head at her. Why didn't you want me to say anything? Superman gazed at her face, seeing a hint of concern on her features. Somehow he knew that her question was deeper than what was on the surface. She wanted to know whether he honestly and truly thought that they could trust the others. He couldn't answer that question. Aside from attacking him, he knew very little of Green Lantern, and that hadn't cast him in the best of lights, green or otherwise, and although he had a run-in with Batman once before, he still wasn't quite sure of his character. Caution is the eldest child of wisdom. The word struck a chord somewhere deep within her. Sakura's eyes grew wide and a grin stretched across her lips. She nodded her head, getting his point completely. It would do her no harm to wait until she knew the Lantern and the others better before she enlisted them to aid in her return to Konoha. She stayed by Superman's side until they were certain they had lost their pursuers, which took at least an hour. No one spoke, but silence was a friend that Sakura became close to, especially since she was afraid that if they started talking again another fight would break out. Sakura glanced at Superman, who appeared to be lost in thought. She wondered what he was thinking of, but didn't ask the question, since she hated it when people asked her that very thing. Her thoughts were her own to share as she pleased. No one had the right to pry. Eventually, they all stopped moving. Glances were traded, and to Sakura, it appeared they waiting for someone to take the lead. Personally, Sakura thought that Batman would be the best for the job. He didn't seem like the type of man to start a fight, but if one was brought to him, he probably wouldn't give up until it was finished. The Flash didn't look interested. Green Lantern held a touch too much arrogance to be placed in such a role in Superman. Sakura glanced at his profile, unaware that she was staring until he turned, faced her gaze and raised a brow quizzically. Sakura shrugged, aware that she had been doing it a lot lately, and looked away. She was a little embarrassed at being caught, but there wasn't much she could do about that, except pretend it hadn't happened. She was thankful that he wasn't anyone she knew on a personal level, as they would have teased her mercilessly for her act. Truthfully, though, back home she had a bad habit of being distracted by a pretty face. She'd have to work on that. At the thought of home, a pang of worry raced through her. She had just healed Naruto along with Obito's help shortly before she disappeared. They barely had time to meet up with Sasuke before she was taken away from her home. She hoped they were okay. She really did. Sakura wasn't foolish enough to think that they'd fail without her by their sides. Konoha and everything in it had always been mainly focused on the two of them anyway. She was barely even a supporting character in the story of their lives. She wasn't jealous, she didn't love them any less because of it, she was just worried. She didn't know what she would do if something happened to them that she could have prevented, but didn't because she was stuck in a world that wasn't her own. She'd never forgive herself. Even if it was something that was beyond her control. We need a place to lay low for a while. A place where no one will stumble across us. Superman, this is your city. Any ideas? Sakura, brought out of her worrisome thoughts, glanced back and forth between Superman and Batman, wondering what would be decided. After some thought, Superman finally said, I know a place. Green Lantern set up a few lamps, bathing the room in his light. His head turned left and right, looking at where they ended up curiously. It was a printing press, or more specifically an abandoned printing press. As far as hiding spots were concerned, he supposed it was as good as any, so he didn't voice any complaints on that front. They weren't getting any closer to figuring out exactly what these creatures were and what their plan was. He did know, on the other hand, that whatever the creatures had planned, it wasn't good. He needed to find a solution to this mess quickly before anyone was hurt. He looked at the group they had amassed and thought about grabbing Flash, as he was the one who called him in to help take on Superman, and leaving them all behind. They'd do better on their own. Yet Kunoichi approached him in those moments slowly, deliberately distracting him. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the room. Lantern had a feeling that the fact that he could hear her was planned. "We're going nowhere fast." Flash zipped over to their side and let out a sigh. "Tell me about it." Lantern looked down at her. Her lips were pursed and he opened his mouth to say something about it, but she spoke first. "When are we going to examine that box?" Night had fallen yet the shrill cry of crickets went unheard. It was as if the world was holding its breath waiting to see what would happen next. Chaos reigned in a manner which had never before been seen by the ninja world. They were in the middle of the fourth great ninja war and they weren't winning. Kakashi Haddock walked sedately up the hill to join his team. He had broken away from the main fighting when he got word that Sasuke and Naruto were down and that Sakura had disappeared with Obito in order to save Naruto's life. He thought that perhaps he had become a bit desensitized. The thought of Naruto being so severely wounded in a battle that his life had to be saved instead of those of his companions was sobering. Naruto was not infallible. He was human just like the rest of them. It was this line of reasoning that told Kakashi that he needed to find his team quickly. However, when he found Naruto it was only to discover that the rumors had been false. Naruto and Sasuke certainly weren't down. If anything they looked stronger than ever. He let out a breath of relief that he hadn't been aware that he'd been holding. Then he realized that something or rather someone was missing. The copy ninja glanced back and forth between Naruto and Sasuke, noting the absence of one particular member. He waited for one or the other to speak up and tell him where she had disappeared to yet neither one of them deigned to answer the unspoken question and so he spoke it aloud. "Where is Sakura?" Naruto's countenance darkened and thereafter turned and looked at Sasuke, causing Kakashi to do the same. Kakashi's fist clenched at his side when the Uchiha remained silent. Kakashi swore then that if Sasuke said that he had killed her then the war be damned, he'd kill the Uchiha where he stood. He had lost too much in his life. He wasn't going to lose either Sakura or Naruto as well. Sasuke's lips curled in disgust, knowing that Kakashi wasn't going to budge until he had given him some sort of answer, which showed Kakashi that Sasuke wasn't as idiotic as he had begun to believe. "She's safe." When no further explanation was forthcoming Kakashi slightly turned his head and looked at Naruto who wouldn't meet his gaze. Kakashi knew then that something was wrong. Naruto didn't avoid problems. He faced them head-on. Something unpleasant twisted in Kakashi's gut. "And I'm just supposed to take your word for it?" It didn't appear to Kakashi that Sasuke cared whether or not he believed him and before Kakashi knew it he had taken a menacing step forward. He had already tried to kill Sakura once. If he succeeded in his second attempt then it would be the last thing he accomplished. Before Kakashi had the opportunity to make good on his threat Naruto stepped between them. Kakashi turned his gaze to Naruto who met his gaze unflinchingly. "Sakura is safe sensei." "Then where is she?" Seeing was believing and until he saw her before him then she wasn't safe. She was in danger and he wasn't certain his mind, on that particular day, was strong enough to accept losing another person. Maybe the next day he'd be able to take a step back away from the edge of insanity, but that day hadn't yet come. "We sent her away." Something about the way Naruto phrased his words didn't sit well with him. "Sakura, one of our strongest medics, voluntarily left during the middle of the war. That doesn't make any sense and it doesn't sound like Sakura at all." Naruto looked away. Kakashi wished he would stop doing that. "That's because we didn't ask her opinion as to whether she should stay or go. We sent her somewhere she would be safe." Kakashi said the words they left unsaid, hoping that by saying them aloud they would realize the magnitude of their actions. "Without her expressed permission. In other words, you kidnapped her." "Kakashi-sensei." Naruto interjected, but Kakashi would hear none of it. "No. Don't pretend that my words are false. Just bring her back." "No," Sasuke said, speaking up before Naruto had the chance to. "We don't need Sakura to win this war." Kakashi couldn't believe he was hearing two of the people Sakura cared for the most in the world belittle everything she had done to become stronger, to stand at their sides as an equal. "He's right, sensei." Kakashi opened his mouth to retort but Naruto's next words made them die in his throat. "We don't need Sakura to win this war. We need her to survive it. So we had to make sure she was safe. We're going to bring her back, honestly. Just not yet." Kakashi gazed up at the darkened sky, asking some deity for guidance that wasn't forthcoming. Sakura was going to kill both of them when she came home. "Where is she?" Kakashi finally asked when he realized he had no words of wisdom to offer the two boys. In fact, as soon as Sakura came home, he was going to throw them to the wolves. Tsunade and Sakura were going to give them hell, but they didn't need to know that right now. "In another dimension." Kakashi frowned. "You mean like the void that my Sharingan can't send things into?" "No." Sasuke's taciturn reply did nothing to soothe his ire. We sent her to a whole new world, sensei. A new world? That wasn't any more reassuring. She could still be dead. He didn't doubt for a second that the possibility of a different world existed. There were many implausible things in their world. The idea of a completely different world that existed outside their own was one of the saner ideas. Did you scout this new world before you sent her to it? They both fell silent and Naruto turned and looked at Sasuke, who didn't return his gaze because it was obviously a stupid question. Of course, they hadn't scouted the world. They were young and foolish and could have perhaps sent Sakura into unnecessary danger. Then you bring her back right now? Seconds passed before Sasuke replied with, no. Examine. Green Lantern glanced at the box thinking surely she didn't mean what he thought. When she didn't flinch away from his gaze and boldly proclaimed, the glow needs to go so we can figure out what it does, he figured she did mean what he thought. She didn't look for a second like she thought her idea was insane or dangerous. Kunoichi made it seem like it was something that had to be done and the sooner the better. He almost believed her himself and relaxed his guard, but at hearing one of his temporary companions reply he didn't. I don't think that's wise, Kunoichi. It was obvious that Superman and Batman, although having a conversation of their own, had been listening to every word, especially since Batman kept him from saying what he wanted to say. Why? Her spine snapped straighter and she took a purposeful step toward Batman. We've accomplished nothing and this is our only clue, our only lead about what's going on. Green Lantern should drop his green glowiness so we can take a closer look at it. Green Lantern looked at Flash and mouthed the words, green glowiness. Flash, who was of no use, just shook his head. He couldn't help but be offended. It's dangerous. Kunoichi smiled slightly. If you're scared, Batman, I'll protect you. Green Lantern bit back a chuckle, but only barely. Flash, unlike himself, wasn't able to hold back. Batman simply stared and Sakura would never admit that his piercing gaze unnerved her a little. Next time she'd keep her mouth shut. It wasn't long before they all stood surrounding the cube as if it held the secrets of the world at their disposal. Sakura never could get Green Lantern to remove his glow, which he referred to as light, from the cube, so she stopped trying to fight a losing battle. They'd have to do what they could within his protective bubble, which she knew wasn't going to be much. A hands-on examination was necessary, mandatory even. I can't see through it. Everyone turned and looked at Superman. You can see through things? Flash asked with a bit of incredulity. Some of the others looked at him with amazement, but Sakura was mainly discomfited by the statement, especially when he replied, most of the time. His pretty blue eyes had suddenly become a danger in more way than one. Sakura folded her arms across her chest and took a discreet step away from Superman. It was the first time she felt uncomfortable around him since she met him, which she thought was funny. He flew through the air and walked through fire, and she was unnerved that he could see through her clothes. But then again, being a female was a funny thing. It didn't help that her genin instruction was a major pervert that had in the past consorted with greater perverts. And don't get her started on Naruto and his transgender tendencies. What brought these things here? I don't remember anyone saying. Flash's brow furrowed as he studied the cube. We think it was an alien life form. Batman and I crossed paths with one earlier today and brought this with us. The Kunoichi and I came in contact with one as well. Only the box that it was carrying blew up. Sakura's head swung toward Superman, alarm coloring her stance. Her heart started pounding loudly, making it difficult for her to hear. She was suddenly glad that her suggestion to examine the box had been vetoed. That's what started the fire. Superman moved closer to Sakura, being able to hear her heart speed up, and wondered at the cause. Her face lost all its color and her eyes darted to the box and then all around the room quickly, as if looking for an avenue of escape. Yes, I thought you knew. We talked about it earlier. Sakura didn't recall any such conversation, but she didn't doubt him. She was still struggling to process everything that happened and she was bound to miss a few details. It was just unfortunate that she had missed a pertinent one. She hoped she wasn't going into shock. Sakura didn't really think so because the scenario that was running through her head wouldn't come to the mind of a person who was in shock. I didn't know what happened. All I knew is that 1 minute the building was fine and the next it was on fire and the enemy was gone. You threw me out, remember? If the other one blew up, then it's logical that this one will as well. Batman interrupted. We need to get this thing out of the city before it. The cube started to make a low ringing noise that progressively got louder as the seconds went by. A slew of expletives fell from Sakura's tongue before she yelled, "Run!" But a loud boom drowned out her words and threw her backwards and into a wall. She hit her head and lost consciousness. All Green Lantern heard before they were bombarded by a herd of aliens was, for Darkseid. They were ugly bastards that had taken them all by surprise. Although he didn't know why. His gut had been telling him that something bad was about to happen. He should have listened to himself, maybe he could have done something. Grimly, Green Lantern looked around him and noted everyone fighting fiercely except Kunoichi. He couldn't find her. He initially thought that it was because her form was so small, but somehow he knew that wasn't the case. He made a construct of a hammer and knocked several of the creatures out of the way. They flew backwards, but several more took their place. Kanoichi. He didn't receive a reply, but after his shout, he saw Batman swing by him with one of the aliens in a headlock. It was that movement that drew his attention to her. She had been captured and one of the aliens knocked a hole in a wall in order to escape with her. The fight spilled outside and GL took out quite a few of their unwanted visitors as he tried to reach Kanoichi before they took her away. It flew Kanoichi up in the air and seconds later he took flight right after them. Her head had fallen forward and her chin rested against her chest. Her pastel-colored tresses fell forward, obscuring her face from view. She was so still he wondered whether or not she was dead. However, what would aliens from presumably another planet want with a human corpse? The answers that he came up with to that question didn't sit well with him. Kanoichi, wake up. He saw her head rise and her eyes open and slowly focus. He assumed she thereafter took stock of her situation as he got closer and closer, but somehow not close enough. Especially since every few seconds he had to fight off the creatures that were intent upon blocking his way. She raised her head up and looked at the creature that held her captive. He saw her lips move, but couldn't hear what she said, but he figured it wasn't necessary that he know, since directly afterward, she swung her feet forward and into the air, propelling her body upward and landing a blow on the creature. It let out a loud cry and dropped her. He expected her to scream, but she didn't utter a sound. Could she fly? After several seconds she continued to fall. He assumed the answer to his unspoken question was a resounding no. Green Lantern changed his ascent into a descent and went after her free-falling form. He had to make it in time. Sakura didn't recognize the voice that pulled her back to consciousness, but she was grateful for it. Her head was killing her. She felt like someone had hit her with a brick. Raising her head, her blurry vision came into focus, revealing that she wasn't on the ground. Sakura sighed. She was really starting to hate the air. Looking up, she realized she had been taken captive. She didn't know whether or not the alien creature understood her, but Superman was supposedly an alien, and he understood her just fine. It wouldn't hurt to test the theory. You can let me go or I can set myself free. The creature's grip on her tightened so she figured he could understand her and refused her offer to do things peacefully. That was okay. She wasn't opposed to the hard way. When Sakura was younger, she hadn't been the most flexible person in the world. She wasn't that child that could bend over and touch her toes easily. In fact, she recalled a lot of pain associated with just trying to make the effort. Flashback. A shrill scream ripped through the air as pressure on her shoulders pushed her downward. The once beautiful day was tainted in misery as her shishu snarled profanities. You can go down further, Sakura. Slide. Down. Tsunade pushed Sakura's shoulders harder, causing Sakura to scream once more. I can't, Tsunade-sama. This is as far as I can go. She was attempting to perform a split, but her body wouldn't even go down halfway. It was pathetic really. One needed to be flexible to be a ninja, and how she had made it this far was anyone's guess. Tsunade pressed harder on Sakura's shoulders. Down, Sakura. Tears filled Sakura's eyes that she struggled not to shed. This really is as far as I can go. I'm not lying. Tsunade stepped back and shook her head. Her arms flew up in the air in exasperation. Aren't they teaching you anything in the academy? How did this get past Kakashi? The flexibility of a shinobi is absolutely essential. It could mean life or death. Sakura rose until she was standing straight and looked at the ground. She couldn't answer that question because answering it meant telling the truth. She had never really done much on Team 7. Kakashi, Naruto, and Sasuke had always protected her. The need for her to be of use in battle had never arisen. Do you stretch every day? Sakura hesitated to answer. She did stretch, but that was only right before she was about to train, and she didn't train with the team every day. I'll take that as a no. From now on, every day you'll stretch your hamstrings, your lower back, your hips, groin, calves, quadriceps, and inner thighs every day for the rest of your life. After Tsunade had listed everything, her eyes were as large as saucers. She had never stretched that many muscles before. Some of those muscles she hadn't even known you could stretch. You don't know how to stretch them, do you? Sakura slowly shook her head and took a step back as her shishu's honey-colored eyes darkened in anger. Fine. I'll teach you that too. Asking to be the apprentice of Tsunade Senju was probably one of the best things Sakura had ever done. It wasn't a matter of the woman being an excellent, although sadistic teacher, it was more of a fact that Sakura had finally decided to take control of her life and stop letting people protect her. If Sasuke's defection had taught her anything, it was to rely on yourself first because people could leave you at any time, and if they did then what would you have? Sakura began rocking her legs back and forth much like she had as a child when she was on a swing set to give herself the momentum to swing her legs upward and give the creature that held her captive a footful of her chakra-enhanced strength. It dropped her, which was no surprise, but that didn't make fooling any more pleasant. She didn't have time to worry about it as she was soon wrapped in a familiar set of arms. Sakura turned her head and looked into the eyes of her savior, and what she saw in their depths made her smile. "We have to stop meeting like this." Superman chuckled. "I agree. Perhaps you could stay out of trouble." "Where's the fun in that?" Superman sighed, and they began their descent to the ground, knowing, somehow, that even though there was a teasing lilt to her voice that she was completely serious. Green Lantern landed next to them shortly thereafter, but said nothing to either of them. He looked like he wanted to say something, but Sakura didn't know him well enough to prod. Besides, they didn't have time for heartwarming and/or wrenching conversations. Sakura reached into her pouch and pulled out a soldier pill and popped it into her mouth, and then thereafter raised her hand to check the back of her head for injuries. The damage hadn't been much. She didn't have a concussion, but it still hurt. "I'm ready." Sakura was aware that both men had been protecting her while she took the time to heal herself. In a way, it reminded her of her genin days and having two teammates to watch her back. The thought made her smile before she rushed into the fray and attacked. She swung her fists, taking down creature after creature, but for some reason never felt like she was getting anywhere. She heard the Flash yell that it wasn't an isolated incident, that these creatures were attacking all over the world, occasionally snatching random people and taking them away. At his words, Sakura began to gnaw on her lower lip. There were only 5 of them, and while they were holding their own, how could they be expected to help the entire world? It was an impossibility. However, there was no cutting her losses and running if this wasn't an isolated incident, and she couldn't do that anyway because when she went home she'd never be able to respect herself. She would never be able to tell anyone what happened to her. In her mind's eye, she could see the disappointed looks on the face of her friends. It was rather disconcerting having such high standards to live up to. She wasn't a Naruto Uzumaki. People didn't rely on her to save the world. She was just a ninja. All she could do was fight until she couldn't fight anymore. "Lantern, you need to concentrate. Your constructs are breaking because your mind is scattered. You need to calm down." Sakura turned her head towards Batman's voice and then looked at Green Lantern's light. Batman was right. They were breaking, and it seemed like they were breaking prematurely, making him less effective in solving their current problem. Green Lantern's face contorted with barely contained rage, and Sakura was afraid another pissing contest was about to occur, and then they'd all end up dead. "Worry about yourself, Batman. You're the only one here without any powers." Sakura's mouth dropped open. Sakura wouldn't call her ability to use chakra power. Every living thing had chakra. Some people were able to use it, some better than others. To her, she was just another ordinary person who had the capability to enhance her strength and heal others. She glossed over the fact that only someone with perfect chakra control would be able to do some of the things that she was capable of doing. She tried to keep a level head, although being on a team with Sharingan Kakashi made that easy. She didn't know what enabled the Flash to move so quickly. She didn't know why Superman could fly or why Green Lantern was able to make solid objects out of light. What she now knew about Batman, though, was that he was holding his own against some very strong creatures, and he didn't appear, although he knew of ninja, to be able to use chakra like she could. So technically he was only a civilian. That thought alone should have her worried about him. She knew that she should probably do to him what Superman had done to her earlier and throw him out of the fray, but frankly she was too damned fascinated. He was actually holding his own. He had to have been trained in some form or fashion in order to have survived this long. If she had the opportunity she'd study under him because your chakra can be made useless, and if you're captured then what? On a personal level, she wouldn't have a backup plan. Without chakra, her taijutsu was passable, but she was no Rock Lee. Sakura, out of the corner of her eye, saw Batman knock one of those creatures flat on its back. She wanted more than passable. This was a man whose side she wanted to be by. If he could hold his own with all these men who had powers, then Sakura thought it would be an honor to fight by his side. It was that train of thought that had Sakura moving away from Green Lantern and his dark disposition and closer to Batman. He noticed her approach almost immediately, and as soon as she was within earshot, he briskly told her, "I don't need your help." Sakura laughed and ducked a fist that was aimed for her head. "I know." If she hadn't been otherwise occupied, she would have seen the small smile that played on Batman's lips and noted that was the beginning of a relationship stronger than any other she'd have, well, in the world that wasn't her own. "Behind you." At Batman's cry, Sakura crouched down and Batman ran towards her. Immediately, she sent a wave of chakra to her shoulders, just as Batman's used them to give himself a boost. She turned her head around afterward to see a body lying prone behind her. "Thanks for the assist." Batman grunted a reply that Sakura took to mean thanks. It was by unspoken agreement that they'd be better off if no one could attack them from behind. That was how they ended up back to back. "How old are you, kid?" Sakura laughed once, and anyone looking would have been frightened as she had just broken the neck of one of their alien visitors. A maniacal gleam entered her eyes that could only be attributed to bloodlust. I'm a legal adult. I left the kid's stage a while back. Super strength. Sakura frowned at the phrasing. It was chakra-enhanced strength, but it wasn't her world. She'd adapt to their odd phrasing until she made it back home. Yeah. Durable. I won't break easily. Good. Before Sakura could say another word, her arm had been grabbed. Her eyes grew large, and Sakura's first instinct was to yank her arm free of captivity. However, when she saw the black mask and not golden armor, she realized she wasn't being attacked and relaxed. Thereafter, her body was lifted from the ground and slung around as if she were a weapon. Sakura sent chakra to her feet, kicking off the heads of any enemy that had the misfortune of being close to her feet. Batman swung her around his entire body, and she had to quietly applaud his flexibility for being able to manage it and not drop her. The depths of her admiration for the man deepened. As he began to lower her body to the ground, she yelled, "Jump." Batman didn't hesitate to heed her words, but Flash, who happened to be nearby, stumbled as her feet hit the ground, causing the ground to tremble, and knocked anyone who was unfortunate enough to not heed her warning off their feet. After the ripple Sakura made it died down, she noted Batman and Flash looking at her a little incredulously. She grinned. She supposed her actions had been a little unexpected. The earth moved, and for once there were no innuendos laced in his internal statement. Batman had literally dropped Kunoichi on the ground, and it formed a wave that you normally only see in the water. Kunoichi was strong, however, before he had the chance to think about that any further she appeared and knocked whatever thoughts he might have had about Kunoichi out of his mind. In her hands was a sword that shone brilliantly as she sliced through opponent after opponent. She made warfare look beautiful. Her dark hair flowed behind her, and her face, though serious because of the task at hand, was remarkable. He had never seen a woman such as this, except for maybe in his dreams. Somehow they had all paired up, with the obvious exception of Superman. Green Lantern had ended up with Flash, while Batman and Kunoichi were working rather well together when the goddess appeared before them. However, it didn't take a genius to realize as Superman and the goddess glanced at each other that there could be something special there, and only a fool would step between them and stop it from occurring. At least it meant that Kunoichi was free. He had to admit that he had been a little put out at the camaraderie between the Superman and the Kunoichi. He still didn't understand how he managed to be right where she needed him to be to keep her from splattering across the ground. Still, despite his thoughts on the pink-haired woman and her relationship with Superman, Green Lantern couldn't help but glance the goddess's way and echo Flash's simple yet entirely appropriate sentiment. Wow. There were myths in Konoha about a village of old, full of female warriors that shunned the companionship of men. They were known for their strength and cunning in battle. Although her master Tsunade denied the claim, it was rumored that her ancestors were of their bloodline. The village that they supposedly lived in could never be found on any map, nor could it be found at all, though it was called Bon Amigdala. She knew very little of the people as it was a legend, but she knew enough to recognize the people, should they happen to step out off of paper and into real life. When the woman with the dark hair appeared, she knew without a doubt that she was looking at one of the fabled Amazons. She fought with such fearlessness and bravery that Sakura couldn't help but to admire her. Her weapon was a sword, although you couldn't discount her fists. There were few female shinobi who didn't fade into the background behind their male counterparts. So it was refreshing to see a woman. Sakura's thought process halted when she noted that the woman was fighting at Superman's side. She watched the way that he looked at her, and she saw the spark between them even if they didn't. Sakura smiled and shook her head. The good-looking ones always got snatched before she could do more than blink. Sakura glanced around and saw that the only one of her temporary teammates that hadn't been momentarily blindsided by the woman's bewitching beauty was Batman, who continued to fight the fine fight. Since staring admiringly at another woman's fighting prowess was not only creepy, it was dangerous, she decided to do the same. Green Lantern's gaze drifted back to Sakura, who, for some reason, amidst the chaos, seemed to be having the time of her life. His first impression told him it had something to do with the fact that she was a ninja. Although, he could silently admit to himself that he, too, enjoyed a good fight. She was sticking close to Batman, although why she'd want to hang around that jerk was beyond him. The creatures were leaving, but Sakura didn't understand why. If they had just continued to battle them, eventually they would have been overrun. Their numbers were sure to run them down eventually. The Amazon gave her greetings, but Sakura's dread was too deep to enable her to respond politely at the moment. It looks like we've scared them off. Green Lantern said it, but there was no rejoicing over the victory in his voice. In fact, he looked rather pensive. She was glad of it because it meant that her sentiments were shared. No. They're assembling. At Batman's reply, Sakura took a deep breath. She didn't ask what they were assembling for. They'd have time for that conversation later. She had other, more important things to deal with. Is everyone alright? Does anyone have any injuries? Tell me quickly. I need to take care of you while I have the chance. Sakura eyed the rip in Batman's costume and waited for him to tell her of his injury, not knowing she was waiting for April snow in Mexico. Her vision wasn't bad and she was certain she saw blood trickling from an injury. When the silence continued, Sakura began to wonder if she had inadvertently picked up another Kakashi. But the scowl embedded on her lips, she made a move towards Batman and found her vision suddenly filled with green that had nothing to do with chakra. I injured my arm. Green Lantern showed her his right arm, which had a deep gash. Sakura's brow furrowed, realizing that the way they battled their enemies was completely foreign to her and was going to take some getting used to. She was accustomed to, as the medic, staying in the background protected unless attacked. While she was more than capable of protecting herself and causing quite a bit of damage on the battlefield, it didn't mean she shouldn't save her strength in order to keep those working with her alive. The every man for himself wasn't working for her. But what could she do? Sakura raised her hand, bringing chakra to her fingertips, only to have Green Lantern jerk backwards. What are you doing? Sakura blinked slowly at the suspicion in his voice. Did he think her incompetent? If that was the case, why had he approached her in the first place? To be honest, her feelings were a little hurt, but she'd never admitted. She's a healer, Superman interjected, looking Sakura's way and giving her a brief nod. Sakura gave him a brief smile before it faded away because she was now uncomfortable. She hated awkward situations. She means you no harm. Batman chose that moment to step forward and reveal the wound on his leg. This time Sakura's smile appeared again, but unlike the previous one, it stayed in place. First and foremost, she checked to see if there was any internal bleeding. She was grateful to find that there wasn't because she wasn't in the ideal situation to deal with that. Batman's injury wasn't as bad as she thought it was. After she was finished healing him, she patted his leg lightly and said, "Good as new." Batman moved his leg slightly, checking the truth of her words, before nodding appreciatively at her. Sakura bit her inner cheek and prepared to return to Green Lantern and heal his injuries, not at all looking forward to the fact that she could see distrust on the face of a man who wore a mask. At least with her genin sensei, she'd been able to see his expressive eye and was able to gauge his emotions from that. Finished being a big baby lantern? Sakura's eyes grew large and found that she was unable to bite back the snicker at the comment. Although it seemed she wasn't alone. She heard Superman and Flash laughing along with her. Yeah. Laugh it up. Green Lantern closed the distance between the two of them and offered his arm once more. There were no further delays in her healing. Sakura had just finished healing Green Lantern's arm when the Flash grabbed her and pointed towards the sea. She frowned, wondering why these men were overly familiar with her person, but decided not to remark upon it. Maybe it was simply the heat of battle that made them the way they were. Depending upon how long she was stuck in this world, she may have time to correct their wayward behavior. Do you see that? They're circling the water. Sakura frowned and glanced at Green Lantern, whose face was grim. His eyes didn't stray from the creatures as if he expected them to turn back and attack at any moment, which wasn't entirely unlikely as their sudden retreat seemed strange. Sakura bit her bottom lip and nodded her head slowly. I see. The question is why? I have a feeling we're about to find out, Superman remarked, and Sakura unthinkingly moved closer to him, which was probably because his proximity made her feel safe. Superman was a heavy hitter and she was used to hanging with the top dogs. Superman looked down at Sakura and wondered how she was holding up. She looked tired and yet she kept fighting. She hadn't uttered a word of complaint about the battle or the weariness he could see in her features. He wondered if it was because she was used to it. Was her homeland unaccustomed to peace? Will you be able to continue? He whispered softly, hoping only she heard his question. A disgruntled frown graced her lips before she raised her eyes that shone with determination and met his own. She raised a hand and pushed back a few strands of hair that had fallen into her face. Her spine straightened and he knew that he had hit a nerve, but for some reason found himself unable to backtrack. He wasn't about to allow her to put herself in danger because of her pride. I can take care of myself. Don't worry about me. Her words, for some reason, didn't make him feel any better. He vowed silently to keep an eye on her and make sure that if she did do anything reckless, that he'd be there to back her up. The sound of rushing water filled his ears and Superman's attention once more turned to the sea. The creatures remained above the water as if anxiously anticipating something. Suddenly the water surged upwards and into the sky, releasing a golden pod from its depths. Ships that were in the water rocked violently from the upheaval, but thankfully didn't capsize. We need to get closer and make sure everyone aboard those vessels are safe. Superman grabbed Sakura around the waist and took to the skies, aware that travel would be faster if he took her with him. He noted that Wonder Woman, also known as Diana, took flight beside him. Flash ran ahead as soon as he uttered his statement and Green Lantern encased Batman in a glow of green and took said Dark Knight with him. As they drew closer to the water, Sakura looked up at Superman. "Put me down. I'll go to the people on the ships." "No. You stay here just in case those creatures decide to attack us. If they do, provide backup. Wonder Woman and I will go for the people on the vessels." Sakura blinked slowly but didn't reply since she wasn't given the opportunity. Superman turned and looked at Diana, who nodded, and off they flew together. Superman was well aware of Wonder Woman's existence. He, himself, had written an article or two about her at the planet. He never had the chance to meet her in person, but he could honestly say that her beauty robbed him of words. Maybe, his words to Sakura had been a bit of a ploy just to have a few seconds at the sight of a woman who had the physical strength and stamina to match him. It was a rare moment that a part of him took comfort in. He didn't feel as alone as he usually did. He would be lying if he didn't say that he hadn't connected with Sakura on a level that he didn't understand, but it was different with her than it was with Diana. Sakura, while obviously very strong, tired almost as easily as the average human. Her strength of will was admirable, but somehow. "Superman," Wonder Woman's voice drew his attention. "I have only found these 3 men." She had one in each arm and one was on her back. Superman used his X-ray vision to scan to see if there was anyone left aboard. There wasn't. Most were in lifeboats trying valiantly to row back to land. "Those are it. I will get those remaining in the water. I'll return to help you shortly." "What is that?" They watched quietly as Superman and Wonder Woman went to save the people stuck out at sea, but inadvertently their attention was once again directed back to the large foreign object that emerged from the sea. The question was uttered by the Flash, but it was thought by them all. Sakura somehow knew that this was the turn for the worse that she had been waiting for. It was only downhill from that point onward. "I was hoping one of you could tell me that." The voice made her stiffen and turn slowly to face the newcomer. He stood with nothing but water behind him, obviously emerging from the sea like some sort of mythological creature. His hair was golden and rivulets of water dripped down his hair and into his face, but he didn't even seem remotely bothered by it. However, that wasn't the first thing that caught her attention. No, the first thing that caught her attention was the color orange. His chest armor was orange. The fact that he had a trident pointed at the throat of one of her new enemies and he wore the bold color that reminded her of home made her smile in welcome, causing one of her nearby companions to frown. "All we can say is that they're our enemy, and if they are yours as well then today we'll call you friend. I go by Kunoichi." "He's Aquaman," Batman answered the unspoken question, making Sakura wonder how much knowledge he had hidden within that brain of his. Had she stumbled across another Shikamaru only he wasn't a lazy bum? The thought appealed to her for some unknown reason. A slight movement out the corner of her eye drew her attention back to the man who had just joined their motley crew. The golden warrior of the sea radiated power and ability. Although that wasn't what, after the orange, next drew Sakura's attention. No, that would be his weapon. She had no idea where he had gotten his trident, but she wanted to know where she could get her own, or if she could borrow his. It was glorious in its simplicity and looked to be extremely effective. Her fingers twitched. She wanted to touch it. Greetings from the others were exchanged quickly, which gave Sakura enough time to compose herself before she did something foolish that would cost her life. "I found this creature." Aquaman hauled up his either dead or unconscious victim for all of them to see as he was setting off a device that tore a hole in the water and then dozens of its kind flew out. "Since you've obviously gathered together to fight them, I will join you." Sakura blinked and looked around at the stunned look on all their faces. She supposed they had united to fight a current common enemy inadvertently. The Flash uttered her thoughts on the matter. "I guess we did. However, you have no one to lead you. I propose I do the honors." Sakura chuckled. She thought the Green Lantern was arrogant, but apparently Aquaman had him beat hands down. Not only did he not ask to join them, he told them he was and then without knowing anything about any of them thought to take on a role of leadership. Aquaman certainly had some large cogence. Sakura took that moment to wonder why it was so common for them to end their codename in man or woman. It really did speak of a lack of originality. "If you don't see a leader then you obviously haven't been looking at me." Sakura sighed, wondering whether or not she was going to have to take back her thoughts on who was more arrogant, Aquaman or Green Lantern. Sakura glanced at Wonder Woman and moved her way. The older woman nodded her head slightly at Sakura in acknowledgement and the two women began to murmur among themselves. "It seems as though the battle has raised their testosterone levels." A smirk graced Sakura's lips. "If you mean that a pissing contest is about to start, then I'd have to agree." The women chuckled. "Maybe one of us should lead and save us all some trouble," Wonder Woman suggested. "If it's not a hospital, then I have no interest in leading it. Although, you can feel free to do the honors. I have no problem following you. I will if it becomes necessary." With just that one statement Sakura realized that she was a no-nonsense type of woman. She would do what was necessary to get the job done and no one would stop her. She could understand that mentality, though, given the amount of moose caca she had to deal with Sai, Kakashi, and Naruto. Sometimes it took a strong woman to deal with a bunch of knucklehead men. Sakura tuned back into the conversation that the males were having in time to hear Green Lantern say, Superman might not say a lot, but he can fly and juggle trucks, the Flash is the fastest man alive. Wonder Woman can slice through an army, and Kunoichi can bend reality and make people see what isn't there. And me? I can do anything with this ring. So really, what can you do that we can't? Sakura frowned. Bend reality? Is that what he thought she could do? She didn't bother to correct him or explain her techniques. Some things were best left a secret. She actually liked being the only one who could do what she did. They all had unique talents that made them individually special. Sakura couldn't help but admire how Aquaman answered Green Lantern's question. It was at that moment that some of the creatures they had been fighting charged their way, yelled in a serpentine hiss for Darkseid. Aquaman turned his back to them and faced their foes. Out of the depths of the ocean came several vicious-looking sharks whose jaws snapped open, promising certain death to the creatures foolish enough to put themselves in its path. And put themselves in their path they did. The shark that happened to be closest to where she stood, mouth snapped closed, and Sakura could hear from where she stood the snapping of bones, and it made her flinch. Somehow, watching someone or something die by an animal was worse than seeing an actual man do it. Maybe it had something to do with being a ninja, and she had become slightly desensitized to death by the hand of man. She had seen Kakashi's dogs attack people before, and it never left her with warm and fuzzy feelings, and yet she had seen the same man kill a dozen men without batting an eye, and it never once bothered her. Another alien, discerning that Aquaman was the cause of the loss of so many of its comrades, charged him. Aquaman, sensing the danger, turned at exactly the right moment to plunge his trident through its mandible and out the top of his skull. With a slight shake, he casually tossed the carcass into the sea. Aquaman thereafter turned and looked at Green Lantern and arched a brow, bringing to the forefront of her mind that before Aquaman's gory display, they had been arguing about his abilities. Sakura turned her back so that Green Lantern wouldn't see her laughing. When she did, she caught Batman looked at her pointedly, and a part of her felt bad for her amusement at the expense of the lantern, but for the most part, she was just amused. She glanced back at Green Lantern to notice him pouting slightly. It was sort of cute. Victor Stone loved his father. He also didn't doubt that his father loved him. However, when he made the touchdown that would bring his team to the state finals and turned to see that his father wasn't there to see it, a part of him hated him. He hated him because it made him a liar and couldn't be trusted. When he saw the green airplane flying in the sky after the game, he decided then to go see his father at STAR Laboratories. His father was so consumed with things like the green airplane in the sky that he couldn't be bothered to keep his promise to his only child. At that time, he felt they needed to talk. It was a discussion that should have occurred long ago. Later he would wish that he had left well enough alone. The stars in the sky could be seen clearly from Wayne Manor. Which was odd because in so many other places in Gotham that wasn't the case. The darkness and mayhem that Gotham was associated with couldn't be seen at the manor, which brought her a small measure of peace. But only a small measure because for the most part Sakura Haruno wasn't happy. She was outside the room Bruce had provided for her where there was a balcony attached. It was, without a doubt, her favorite place to be since it was the one place where she could truly think. The balcony doors were securely closed behind her and she sat on the railing just looking up at the sky and swinging her legs idly. She had been living with Bruce lately. Staying with Clark had become rather uncomfortable as his relationship with Diana progressed. She didn't have a job since legally speaking, she didn't exist in their world, so she had been living off Clark. It wasn't something that sat well with her. Not that Clark made her feel like a burden. Whenever she broached the subject with him, she was waved off as if the subject didn't matter, but it did. She was a single woman living with an attractive man who had a significant other. Bluntly speaking, she was a kept woman, except there were no romantic entanglements between the two of them. If she were in Diana's place it would bother her. So with due respect to the Amazon, Princess Sakura asked Bruce if she could stay with him until she figured out what she was going to do. Clark hadn't been exactly happy about her decision, but it turned out to be the best move. Bruce, although he didn't live alone, had plenty of space for her to stay. Not to mention there wasn't really a steady woman in his life that she knew of that would feel uneasy about her presence. Snow fell from the sky and touched her face, causing her to shiver. She should have grabbed a blanket as she didn't want to waste chakra trying to keep herself warm. She thought about going back inside but didn't really want to. Because, while she felt she wasn't a particular burden on Bruce, he did have a family that she wasn't really comfortable around. Especially this time of year. She felt like an outsider. It was December 1st. What are you doing out here? Sakura hadn't heard the doors open, but given who had joined her it wasn't something that should have surprised her. A blanket was thrown over her shoulders, and Sakura looked up into a familiar pair of ice blue eyes gratefully. Sakura smiled wearily before turning away from her host and huddling a little more into the blanket that had been given her. Thinking about home. Bruce made a non-committal noise and moved closer to Sakura's side. He was close enough to touch, but neither of them made a move to close the final distance between them. She was glad he didn't, as she was certain if he did she would cry, which would only serve to make them both feel uncomfortable. You know you have a home with us as long as you wish, Sakura. She knew that. That didn't mean she belonged. That didn't mean she didn't miss Naruto's smiling face or Kakashi's perversions. Sakura closed her eyes and lowered her head in an effort to control the pain in her heart and keep it from being heard in her voice. I had a life away from this world, Bruce. I had purpose and meaning. Sometimes I feel like I'm here because I'm useless. I want to go home. I need to prove my worth. He didn't reply, which wasn't unusual. When he was at home he was never much of a talker. When he was Batman he wasn't much of a talker either. She guessed that was just his nature. It will be Christmas soon and I don't even know if my loved ones are even alive. They don't know if I'm alive. Sakura sighed at his silence and continued. We don't know where I came from, but Hal offered to take me with him and talk to the Guardians, to see if they know of the world that I came from, to see if they know how I managed to arrive here and why. You want to go? I do. Sakura turned around then and bit her bottom lip only to see Bruce staring at her steadily. She met his gaze unflinchingly because he had to know she was serious about this. She wanted him to understand and respect her decision to leave. She didn't know why that was so important to her, only that it was. And this has nothing to do with Clark and his relationship with Diana. Sakura's eyes narrowed. What does that have to do with anything? I am aware that you're fond of him. Of course, he was. There was very little that could be hidden from his all-knowing eyes. He wasn't even supposed to know that Clark and Diana were together. They didn't want people to know yet, but it didn't surprise her that Bruce had somehow come across the information. I am fond of Clark, but not in the sense you're implying. Silence descended among them that eventually had to be broken. I can't make you stay, but I ask that you keep in mind that this is a special time of year. If you leave now then Hal has to leave as well. And what of his family? His friends? I have no doubt that he'd go now if you asked it, but you should take his feelings into consideration. He was right and she knew it. She couldn't ask Hal to help her search for her homeworld right now. It wouldn't be fair to him. Sakura looked down once more. But if this has something to do with Clark and Diana, I ask that you reconsider. Sakura's eyes widened at the request, but she didn't get the chance to question him on it. Come on. You've been cooped up in your room the entire time you've been here and you've yet to meet anyone. He was right. She had been rude, and the honest truth was that she couldn't believe that he tolerated it. Sakura climbed down off the railing and thereafter bowed. Please forgive my rudeness. Bruce waved a hand and gestured for her to come inside and she did so. She thought she saw a bit of warmth in his normally cold eyes, but it was gone so quickly she was certain she imagined it. Her eyes closed as she walked in, and when the warm air from the heater hit her face and seeped into her bones, a sigh of bliss escaped her lips. She ignored Bruce's chuckle. They walked out of her room and down the hallway, and Sakura had yet to relinquish her blanket. She knew she'd have to eventually. She actually felt odd walking around Bruce's opulent home wrapped in a blanket. She decided to hold on to it until someone told her to let go. So how many children do you have? 3 sons. Sakura glanced at him, surprised. 3 children. She wouldn't have thought it of him. He seemed so disciplined and controlled. It sort of surprised her that she was wrong. And no wife. You've been busy. Bruce raised a brow at her phrasing, then chuckled. 2 are adopted. Only 1 is my biological son and that is a long story. Sakura blushed and turned her head, hiding her face from view, but she had a feeling he knew she had just embarrassed herself. And they all stay here with you? The oldest lives on his own, but for the holidays, he comes and stays a week or 2. So he's not here now, but he'll be here later on this month. You'll meet him soon. And are they like you? Bruce frowned, obviously wondering what she meant. She could have meant several things. Handsome, smart, rich were only the starters. However, that wasn't what she meant in the least. I've heard about Batman's Robin, so I wondered. Bruce didn't reply, and Sakura figured she had gone a little too far. The rest of their walk was completed in silence. He led her to the dining room. It was her first time being there as she took her meals in her room. Her eyes immediately landed on Alfred, who smiled at her in welcome. Miss Sakura, it's good to see you out and about. It's good to be out, Alfred. Alfred, aside from Bruce, was the only person in Wayne Manor that she'd had contact with. There were times when she felt like she was being watched, but since she didn't detect a threat, she didn't bother searching for the presence, especially since nothing perverted was going on. Alfred pulled out a chair for her and Sakura sat down at Bruce's right side. They weren't alone for long. A little boy entered the room shortly after them. If Sakura had to guess, she'd say he was about 8 or 9. His eyes took in the room, and somehow Sakura knew by the way he took everything in, was that he was trained. No child paid that much attention to detail unless at some point in his life he had to. The boy finally met Sakura's gaze, and she knew without a doubt that this was Bruce's biological son. "Damien, come meet Sakura." Damien stalked forward and raised an eyebrow at Sakura. She had no idea what he expected her to do, but something about him gave her the impression that he was an insufferable twit, which would be normal for a child his age. "Can you fight?" Sakura smiled. "Can you?" She already knew the answer to the question, but she wanted to hear his answer. He opened his mouth, but before he could reply to her an older boy walked in, ruffled his hair, and gave him a slight push out the way. Sakura bit her bottom lip when she saw Damien scowl. The older boy walked over to her and extended his hand, which Sakura took and shook slightly. Sakura silently admitted that he was a cutie. "I'm Tim. I've heard a lot about you." Sakura smiled. "I'm Sakura. I wish I could say the same." Tim was a little taller than her, but being a part of the Justice League made her used to being the smallest one around. She was just thankful that Damien was shorter than her. At least she had some hide on someone for a little while at least. "So, what are you going to do about your secret identity?" "Secret identity?" Sakura asked him curiously. He, himself, told her that he was Red Robin, not Batman's Robin. That was someone completely different. Although, she now had a clue as to who Robin actually was. She still never asked the question again, though. She figured if Bruce wanted her to know he'd tell her. Besides, Tim told her he was Red Robin, but she technically wasn't supposed to know. She had been sworn to secrecy and she wasn't about to break Tim's confidence. He was becoming someone she enjoyed being around. He was extremely intelligent and had a decent sense of humor. But although that was true, she wondered why Bruce adopted him. Speaking of Bruce, he had gone to Wayne Enterprises, leaving the three of them at home with Alfred, who only appeared when she was snooping. She swore the old man had some sort of tracking device on her that she just couldn't find. "Yeah, I mean you hair is a dead giveaway that you work with the Justice League and for safety reasons, we can't afford to have that type of connection." She was aware of that. She often altered her appearance when she lived with Clark, but she only did that because he told her he didn't want people to know he was Superman. She supposed the same line of logic could be used for Bruce. "When I leave the house I alter my appearance." Tim looked at her quizzically. "Really? How?" "Like this." Sakura moved her fingers slightly, altering her eye color and changing it to blue while she changed her hair to a fiery red. Tim's eyes grew large. "It'd be great for undercover work." Sakura laughed. "Can you make yourself look like someone else?" Sakura furrowed her brow and then said, "You mean like this?" Tim immediately jumped away from the table, toppling his chair when he found himself looking into the insane eyes of Joker. Sakura laughed and returned to her normal appearance. "Keep that one a secret. Not many people know I can do it." "No problem. In fact, I'll forget that ever happened." Sakura pressed her lips together to keep from laughing again. He hadn't looked particularly happy that she was amused at his expense. "Come on." Tim grabbed Sakura's hand and pulled her to her feet. "Where are we going?" "My room." Sakura grinned and said, "I'm not that type of girl." She had the delight in feeling him drop her hand like it was on fire and seeing his face turn a deep red color. Sakura quietly admitted to herself that she liked teasing Tim. He made himself such an easy target that she just couldn't resist. She never had that type of relationship with any guy back home, but she sort of wished she did. It was so amusing. "I didn't mean." Tim took one look at Sakura's face and scowled. "How old are you anyway?" "You're seriously asking me my age?" The offense on Sakura's face wasn't to be taken lightly, and yet Tim was obviously incredulous. "Aren't you a little young to be concerned with people knowing how old you are? Aren't you old enough to know asking in the first place is rude?" Tim scowled again, grabbed her hand, and dragged her along. Sakura couldn't help laughing out loud as he tugged her. When he opened the door to his room, Sakura's eyes grew large. It was nothing like her ornately decorated bedroom that looked like it was designed specifically for a woman. In fact, the only clue that it was a bedroom at all was the bed. Otherwise, it looked like an office. Or realistically speaking, like the Batcave. She had only been in there once, but she only needed one time for it to leave an impression. She was certain the same could be said for Tim's bedroom. Monitors filled the room from floor to ceiling that he turned on as soon as they entered the room. Once the computer booted up, he immediately started typing and pulled up image after image for her to look at. "What's going on, Tim? Who are these people?" "They're metahumans like you." Sakura frowned. She didn't know what that was, but just from the context clues, it wasn't a definition that fit her. "I'm not a metahuman. I'm just human." "No offense, Sakura, but you'll never be just a human. Especially since you're a member of the League." Sakura's frown deepened, but she didn't reply, and Tim took that as his sign to continue. "Teenage metahumans all over the world have been disappearing lately. I have evidence that points to a group called NOWHERE being behind their disappearance. Kidnapping? Have you told anyone from the League? Besides you? No. Why would you tell me? Because this is something I wanted to handle myself, but I was thinking maybe you'd come with me. Come with you where? Have you talked to Bruce about this? New York, and he'll be fine with it if you ask for me. Sakura's eyes grew large. Tim was nothing but trouble. He thought he could look at her with those pretty blue eyes and get whatever he wanted. But Sakura was no sucker. Wait a minute, Tim. Come on, Sakura. I'm not blind. Anyone can see that Bruce has a soft spot for you. She didn't know whether or not she'd call it a soft spot. Bruce was a hard man who didn't tolerate foolishness from anyone well. It just so happened that she wasn't capable of tolerating high volumes of BS either. They recognized that in one another and as a result worked well together. He doesn't have a soft spot for me. You make it sound like something that it's not. Soft spot. Tim reiterated, clearly causing Sakura to roll her eyes. So you want me to exploit it? Sakura deadpanned. Not missing a beat, Tim retorted, yes. Sakura couldn't help but laugh at how seriously he uttered his yes. No. I'm not even supposed to know you're Red Robin. Then I'll tell him that I told you. We'll wait a few weeks and then you can convince him to let me go. Sakura ran a hand over her face when she realized he wasn't about to let this go. How about this, tell him I know that you're Red Robin, and then if he doesn't kill us both we'll discuss me convincing him to let you go to New York. And you'll come with me? Sakura smiled sadly at Tim not giving him an answer. Bruce was not happy that Tim told Sakura that he was Red Robin, and that was putting it mildly. She heard the two arguing on and off for a few days and had avoided the dark night until he had calmed down enough for her to approach him. Which just so happened to be early one morning when he was coming in from his usual patrol of Gotham. She was waiting in the shadows of the Batcave and had just watched him take off his cowl when she revealed her presence. He sensed her immediately turning his head to look in her direction. His eyes narrowed slightly and inwardly Sakura frowned. He made it seem like she forced him to tell her about Red Robin when such was not the case. He was being illogical, but she knew pointing that out would only start a fight and that wasn't what she wanted to do. She wanted peace. What are you doing down here? I was waiting for you. Sakura closed a distance between the two of them, saying nothing when Batman sat at the chair of his computer and began typing. Silence settled between the two that Sakura was hesitant to break. She had to think carefully about what she would say because she knew this was a pivotal moment for both of them. I won't betray you. Sakura watched him stiffen but ignored it and continued to speak. I've been betrayed before by someone I loved. It's one of the worst experiences of my life. I can't say that I agree wholeheartedly with the ideals of the League. I can't say that I will be a part of it for the rest of my stay here in your world, but I can say that while I am here I will not betray you. Your family is my family even if Damien is an annoying little twerp. Bruce gave her a look to which she merely smiled at. What I'm saying is you don't have to trust me, but the truth is you can. He didn't reply, but she honestly didn't expect him to. She was about to turn and leave when she heard him say, I've been working on this case lately. The Joker has escaped from Arkham. It was an olive branch that Sakura took willingly. Isn't it the asylum here in Gotham? It is. I have a question for you. If a man somehow manages to skin himself, what type of damage will that do to his body? Sakura blinked. The thought was as disturbing as it was shocking. She couldn't think of anyone, friend or foe, who was into self-mutilation. It was a new thing for her. He skinned himself. While he was alive. Either he did or someone did it for him. Sakura frowned. The Joker was nuttier than she thought he was. Do you know how deep he went? Do you have the skin? The police have it. Can I see it? Bruce paused before saying, I'll see what I can do. But those words, Sakura was certain they would be okay. Did you talk to him about it yet? Sakura frowned at Tim. She didn't like the fact that he wanted her to speak for him. If it was something he was truly passionate about, then he would speak to Bruce himself. In truth, she had no intention of talking to Bruce, but rather she was going to encourage him to do it himself. She'd be there with him if need be for moral support, but she honestly couldn't think of a good reason why she should step between father and son. She couldn't tell him that yet, though. She had a feeling he wouldn't take it well. Besides, she was certain that if he just spoke to Bruce, he'd approve letting him go. No, I haven't and I won't until you train with me. Tim was puzzled, so Sakura decided to explain. In my world, missions have ranks. S, A, B, C, and D. A D ranked mission is the lowest rank. Sakura nodded, noting how nice it was to talk to someone who caught on so quickly. And S is the highest. However, you had to be a certain level of ninja to go certain missions. So. I get what you're saying, Sakura. Do you? Do you want to know if I'm capable of handling this mission? You're worried about me. Sakura didn't bother to deny it. It was true. The incident with Superman a while back haunted her dreams. She wasn't going to throw Tim into a situation he couldn't handle if she could help it. If you're that worried then come with me. Tim, I can't. Why? Sakura wanted to hug him because she knew she hurt his feelings, but Tim could be standoffish sometimes and she didn't want to cross any unspoken boundaries. Because after the holidays, I'm leaving with Green Lantern. He looked stunned, which didn't surprise her. She didn't really talk about her home out loud. It pained her too much to do so. You're moving in with Green Lantern? Sakura's eyes grew large. What did she just said to make him draw that conclusion? What? No. We're not, Tim. Sakura punched him in the shoulder when he started laughing. He stumbled backward but still continued to laugh. Ah, the expression on your face was priceless. Sakura pursed her lips. I don't like you. Yeah, you do. Tim countered and smiled at her, coaxing one out of her as well. So, where are the two of you going? He's going to help me find my homeworld. Oh. There was a wealth of meaning hidden behind that simple word, but Sakura couldn't decipher it. Sakura tilted her head to the side, studying his face closely. Tim? Tim just shook his head, no longer meeting her in the eye. So you wanted to train, right? Sakura nodded her head. Let's go train then. He walked away and Sakura followed behind him, silently wishing she hadn't told him she was trying to find her home. She knew well that she'd miss him when she was gone. She was certain he felt the same way about her. December 15th was a very eventful day. It was the day that Tim agreed to talk to Bruce for his own cause. She, of course, was begged and bribed into joining him in his endeavor. However, Tim's bribing methods left much to be desired. Sakura shoved a piece of chocolate into her mouth and gave Tim a dirty look that he studiously ignored. He didn't know how fortunate he was that it was perfectly good chocolate. Bruce, can I talk to you for a moment? Bruce looked up from some documents he was perusing and looked back and forth between Sakura and Tim. He frowned slightly and raised a brow, gesturing for the two of them to sit. Sakura took a seat that put her between the two of them as a sort of mediator. It was a role that she didn't want at all. Sakura sighed. She had no idea when she had developed a weakness for pretty blue eyes. It was going to be the death of her. Metahuman teenagers are disappearing across the world. Bruce frowned. How long have you known this? I noticed it 3 months ago. And you've just now mentioned it. Tim nodded. I thought it was a coincidence at first, but I've been looking into it further, and now there's no way that it's this much of a chance event. Bruce nodded. I'll speak to a few members of the league tonight and… Tim cleared his throat and glanced at Sakura, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, I'd like to take care of this myself. And how do you propose to do that? I've gathered evidence that a group called NOWHERE is taking them and are currently based in New York. I want to go there and see what I can find. He's proposing a strictly reconnaissance mission. Bruce's attention turned to Sakura. I suppose you approve of him going on this mission alone. I think Tim is capable enough and smart enough to handle himself. I think you feel the same. Bruce didn't reply and Sakura sighed. Bruce, you know he'll contact you if he needs assistance. And what if he realizes he needs assistance too late, then what, Sakura? Then this is the life he chose. This is the life we all chose. It comes with consequences. If he wasn't ready to accept them, then he never should have walked down this path in the first place and you shouldn't have let him. At some point in our lives, we have to push forward. If Tim feels he can handle this, who are we to say he can't? Bruce and Sakura stared hard at each other for an eternity before Bruce broke the silence. Leave Sakura, I need to talk to Tim alone. Sakura opened her mouth to argue but thought better of it. She rose to her feet and walked out, briefly touching Tim's shoulder in a show of support before walking out. When they were certain Sakura was no longer within hearing distance, the conversation continued. You brought her in here with you on purpose. Tim didn't bother to deny it. Instead, he grinned, which brought a small smirk to Bruce's lips. It showed strategy and foresight. In the future, I'd advise against it. It won't work twice. Tim's smile grew wider. He doubted that. Sakura was gnawing on her bottom lip in worry, wondering what was going on between Bruce and Tim. She was tempted to eavesdrop but decided against it, knowing Tim would tell her what happened regardless. Knowing that she'd find out eventually didn't help ease her worries, though. In fact, it distracted her so much so that she barely noted a foot flying in her direction. Damien got kicks out of attacking her at random moments. Especially since she was able to block his attacks with relative ease. Moments like this between the two of them were normal to Sakura and it no longer bothered her since they had established boundaries. Damien went so far to attack her in her bedroom once. It made her so angry that she used a genjutsu on him so terrible she was surprised that he was able to walk out of her room without crying once she dispelled it. Still, he never attacked her in her room again. Her lips flattened into a thin line and she prepared herself to beat Damien down when he was intercepted by an unfamiliar personage. He grabbed Damien's leg and tossed him across the room. Damien merely tucked and rolled amazingly, not knocking anything over in the process. Eventually, he stood and brushed himself off. He looked at the man who threw him and Sakura prepared herself to fight the intruder when Damien said, "Oh, it's just you." Damien walked away then, but not before scowling at the man that Sakura finally took a good look at. Her heart stopped. He was absolutely gorgeous. Dark hair, gorgeous eyes and killer body. Sakura's most favorite things. Sorry about him. He's a bit of a handful. He extended his hand and gave her a smile to die for, Grayson. Sakura Haruno. At the mention of his name, Sakura realized this was the illustrious oldest son. Welcome to the family. Sakura laughed. Ah, I wouldn't go that far. I'm just staying here until I go home, so Sakura shrugged her shoulders. I've heard that, but you also know who we are, and if Bruce is willing to let you know our identity, then you're family. Sakura flushed, somewhat pleased by his words. Although she was surprised that he didn't know it wasn't something Bruce had revealed to her because he wanted to. She only knew for certain that Tim was Red Robin. She guessed that Damien was Robin, and if that was then case, did that mean that too had some sort of alter ego? It was probable. But who was he? Sakura deduced that it would be rude to ask. So where were you headed before Damien attacked? Truth be told, she didn't want to admit that she was wandering around worrying about Tim and Bruce and debating whether or not to eavesdrop. So she told a small lie and wrapped it in a bit of truth, hoping he wouldn't notice, since even she could admit that she was a terrible liar. Actually, Damien's attacks are a daily thing. I was actually just wandering around in order to get the first one out of the way so I can relax for a while. Smart. Sakura smiled. I like to think so. The two made their way to the kitchen where Alfred greeted them both. Miss Sakura, Master, are you here for a snack or to visit me? A bit of both. Alfred smiled winsomely and Sakura couldn't help but smile as well. How long are you staying, Master? Sakura looked at him curiously, wondering the same thing. I'm leaving after New Year's Day. I really don't like being away from Bloodhaven for too long. Alfred nodded and passed him a glass of milk and cookies which he dived into with the gusto of a young boy. Sakura smiled when Alfred passed her share to her. I should have served you first, miss, but I was afraid he'd steal yours. He still might, so be careful. Sakura laughed. Oh, sure. Embarrass me in front of the pretty girl, Alfred. Alfred chuckled and Sakura hid a blush. Where's Bruce? He's with Master Tim. They're discussing something of the utmost importance. Alfred glanced at Sakura and winked, leaving her to believe that he was aware of everything that happened within the manor. In some ways he was even more amazing than Bruce, but then again he did raise him. Nodded. Anything I need to know about? I'm sure if Master Bruce feels it necessary, he'll let you know before you leave. Laughed. In other words, mind my own business. That would be correct, Master. Sakura couldn't help but join in with laughter at that rejoinder. Richard's room was right next to hers, which made them running into one another inevitable. Especially since they both got up at the same time of the morning to do the same thing. Train. Sakura made a habit of jogging around Wayne Manor. Her aim was 5 miles daily, but sometimes she tried to surpass that goal. When, who she now called Richard, met her in the hallway on her way out, he raised a brow at her exercise attire. She wore what they called a sports bra, which was a million times better than chest bindings and definitely a lot more convenient. She also wore a pair of comfortable red jogging shorts that barely covered her assets. Sakura flushed. She didn't usually have this problem. She never ran into Bruce in the morning because he was deeper in their wing of the manor, and such was the case with Tim and Damien. What are you doing up? She didn't bother to hide her disgruntlement, but it didn't do her any good since he ignored it. He looked like he was about to choke on his tongue. She was seconds away from telling him to take a picture when he finally found his voice. What are you wearing? Sakura folded her arms across her chest, which only drew his attention to it. Sakura typically wasn't the type of person who flaunted her body. She didn't have much of one. Yes, she was toned, but that didn't mean she had a lot of what men like to see in a woman. Richard's gaze only served to make her self-conscious. Clothes. His eyes continued to trail over her form. I can see that. You look very tantalizing. Sakura frowned, not knowing whether or not to be insulted or flattered. Going to the exercise room? I'm going jogging. Sakura corrected. Richard paused, trying to gauge whether or not she was serious. You do realize it's December. Your point being? Richard, exercising caution, somehow knowing that he had somehow stepped onto thin ice, said, nothing. You want some company? She didn't, but right before she had the chance to refuse him, he smiled at her, and her heart did a cartwheel in her chest. She turned away before he could see her blush once more and called out, do what you want. A smile widened right before he ran to catch up with her. How are you not cold? Sakura laughed and moved faster. Richard had no trouble keeping up, but she wasn't going all out, which could explain a few things. Eventually, they ran side by side, all small talk ceasing. For some reason time seemed to move faster with Richard at her side. It also made running 5 miles seem easy. When they finished their run, Sakura was breathing heavily and the cold was a blessed thing since she felt so overheated. "You do this every day?" Sakura nodded. "I have to do something. There are no training fields here and I can't afford to get soft." "Have you talked to Bruce about this?" "Not really, but Damien helps with his midday attacks, although I'm not sure that's his intention." "Probably not," Richard said wryly. "You should talk to Bruce. I'm sure he wouldn't have a problem training you. I already owe him so much." "Sakura, trust me, if Bruce doesn't want to do something there is nothing in the world that can convince him to do it. If you ask he won't feel like you're twisting his arm." Sakura sighed. "I'll keep that in mind." They walked back inside the manor only to run into Alfred. His eyes were larger than Richard's when he first saw her. After a pregnant pause, he cleared his throat. "Miss Sakura, did your clothes abandon you this morning?" Sakura raised a hand and covered her face. She also ignored Richard snickering. None of this would have happened if she hadn't run into him this morning. And yet. Sakura shook her head, not allowing that train of thought to go any further. "I'm going to shower and change now, Alfred. Want some company?" "Master, that is no way to speak to a lady." Sakura didn't know whether to laugh or cringe in embarrassment. Instead, she chose to go to her room and pretend like none of it ever happened. Bruce was throwing an elaborate party and Sakura's understanding of the situation was that it was a regular occurrence. The ballroom was awash in light. The chandeliers gleamed brilliantly, candles were lit everywhere, and not to mention the Christmas lights that decorated the ballroom. All in all, it was an exquisite sight that was tastefully done. No one could ever say that Bruce Wayne didn't have taste. Sakura entered the ballroom before the guests had arrived and looked around curiously. "Aren't you going to get dressed?" Sakura turned and smiled at the voice, seeing Richard standing in the doorway. He was in a tuxedo, but he was missing his shoes and tie. He was definitely a sight for sore eyes. She admired his nice form for a second or two until a smirk appeared on his face that told her he knew how well he looked and he knew she liked it. Sakura shook her head at him. "I have plenty of time for that. That hasn't been my experience with women." Sakura narrowed her eyes. "Well, we all aren't cut from the same cloth." Richard chuckled, dismissing the anger she was prone to. In the weeks since Richard had come to the manor, they bickered quite frequently. For some reason, it tickled him to get a goat. "What are you doing down here anyway? You're always wandering about." It was true. She did have the penchant for getting lost in the manor. She seemed to find something new every time she went exploring. "Just looking around. You get a whole different experience in a room full of people. I wanted to see it before that." Richard nodded, accepting her explanation, and then looked around himself at all that had been done. The silence was companionable, which Sakura found odd given the amount they argued with each other. And she was very comfortable with Richard, almost as comfortable as she was with Tim and Bruce. "Can I ask you a couple of questions? Some personal?" Sakura blinked at the serious tone of voice. For the most part, Richard and serious didn't really go together. Sakura shrugged her shoulders. "You can ask. I might not necessarily answer." "I can accept that. First things first." Richard raised his hand and Sakura saw a bow tie hanging from his hand. "Can you tie a bow tie?" Sakura rolled her eyes and walked over to Richard, taking the tie out of his hand. He bent down so that she could reach him. She fixed his bow tie quickly as it wasn't her first time. She had to do this a time or two for Kakashi when he was on an undercover mission. She had to admit she had gotten pretty good at it. "Shall I address your shoe problem as well?" Richard opened his mouth and then shut it quickly, causing Sakura to narrow her eyes dangerously. "What?" Richard shook his head. "Sorry, I just stopped myself from getting into a world of trouble. I'm not trying to jump in recklessly." Sakura pursed her lips but decided not to pursue the issue. Although, she could admit that she was very curious about what he would have said. "So what else did you want to ask?" Richard straightened immediately and surprised her by immediately launching into it. There was no hesitation or embarrassment at his attempt to delve into her personal life. His eyes bore into hers as if willing her to give him the truth. "What's going on with you and the man in blue?" Sakura's brow furrowed. First Bruce and now Richard. She didn't understand why they were so obsessed with her relationship or lack thereof with Clark. "What do you mean?" "I mean, were the two of you an item?" Sakura's face turned beet red. Sakura was a little bewildered at the thought and found she could only shake her head in answer to Richard's question. "Why do you ask?" "Bruce told me the two of you used to live together, but you're here now, so." "We're not and weren't an item. We're just friends." Stared at her for a long moment before saying, "Good. I'm going to finish getting dressed. You should, at the very least, get started." He disappeared before she could say anything further. Sakura stared at the empty doorway for a while before she wondered what he meant by good. Sakura shook her head. Blood relative or not, he was certainly Bruce's son. The party was in full swing by the time Sakura joined the festivities. The truth was she hesitated in getting dressed because she was waiting for Victor to arrive. He had plans to stay in seclusion because there was no way he could go out without people knowing who he was. So she planned to help with a little genjutsu beforehand. It was only a band-aid for the situation, but she figured he, of all people, deserved a moment to just relax. Sakura thought back briefly to Victor's arrival. Flashback. Sakura, are you sure no one will know who I am? Trust me. You'll only look like Victor Stone tonight. You'll only feel like Victor Stone to other people. Just keep in mind you are not only Victor Stone anymore. You're also our cyborg. Be careful. Cyborg nodded and looked in the mirror at the genjutsu Sakura had placed upon his person. It's odd seeing myself like this again. Sakura didn't know how to reply to that, so she didn't answer. Sakura, you're a medic in your world, correct? I am. Do you think is there any chance that you can fix me? I mean, I've seen your chakra do some pretty unimaginable things, so it's not completely off the table, right? Sakura frowned. I don't know, Vic. Truthfully, Sakura didn't want to try. She was almost certain that at this point fixing him was an impossibility. Her trying in the first place could only hurt him, and that wasn't something she wanted to do. If I ask you to, would you try? Vic, I was planning on asking Hal tonight to help me find my homeworld. At the expression on his face, Sakura found that she couldn't say anything else. I'll take a look before I go. I'm not making any promises, though. Thanks, Sakura. Sakura nodded. I'll go in first. Sakura's mind snapped back to the present when she heard his voice. You're late. The dress had to be the reason he knew who she was. He had helped her pick it out. Shopping with Bruce Wayne had been an endeavor she would never forget. It was like he was a completely different man from the one she had grown to know. He adopted a carefree persona that warmed her heart fiercely. He seemed happy and fun to be around. She couldn't believe how much they had laughed together just trying to pick an appropriate dress. She had completely altered her appearance, which on some level she enjoyed. Being someone else for a night, it was fun. But she knew Bruce wasn't about to allow her to wander about without some way of knowing exactly who she was. Bruce held out his arm to her and Sakura linked their arms together. On the contrary, I'd say I was right on time. Bruce ignored her, which made Sakura smile. Almost everyone is here. I'm going to kick things off with a dance. With me? Bruce laughed at her alarm, causing a head or two to turn in their direction, and Sakura found herself pouting quietly. No, with me. Bruce disentangled himself from her side and moved over to the woman with short dark hair and piercing eyes. Suki, this is Selena. Sakura blinked at the name and looked back and forth between the two of them, noting several things. The first being Bruce was very attracted to the Selena. The second was, even though he was attracted to her, he didn't trust her. Hence, he introduced her as Suki. Pleased to meet you, Selena, Sakura said with a smile. The pleasure is all mine. She purred. Sakura bit her bottom lip to keep from smiling. That one statement told Sakura so much. The main point being, if Bruce ever allowed himself to trust Selena, she would do him a world of good and probably pull the stick that was sometimes wedged up his behind out, but she didn't know the history behind the distrust, so wouldn't question him about the issue. No, I think it's mine. Sakura ignored Bruce's stare and shooed them to the dance floor where they started the first dance of the evening. She watched Bruce and Selena for a few seconds, smiling slightly before making a move to find someone she was familiar with. She didn't have to go far. Excuse me, may I have this dance? Sakura's eyes widened at the figure before her. Clark. What are you doing here? Bruce invited me. Is Diana here with you? Sakura glanced around looking for the Amazon princess, but not spotting her. She decided not to come since she was too easily recognizable. I could have. Sakura halted her words. If Diana had wanted to come, she would have found a way. Saying that right now would only hurt Clark. So about that dance. The smile that had started fading away reappeared on Clark's face. Sakura rolled her eyes. Let's go. Sakura maneuvered her way onto the dance floor with Clark right behind her. When she finally made it to the floor, she made a move to turn around, but Clark spun her around and pulled her into his arms in time with the music. Sakura's heart startled, but then she smiled and moved with him. How did you know it was me? Sakura inquired. You can change the outside as much as you want. Clark raised a hand briefly and slid his glasses down his nose a bit. But you can't change the inside. Sakura bit back a snort as she thought of him and his dangerous eyes. Besides, I knew you'd be incognito, so it was the fastest way to find you. I'm glad you came. Are you sure? Sakura glanced into Clark's eyes at the worried note in his voice. What do you mean? I got the impression when you left that you weren't happy with me. Sakura squeezed his arm, slightly aware of the hard muscle beneath the dark tuxedo he chose to wear. Clark, my leaving had nothing to do with me being angry at you. But it did have to do with me. Sakura frowned. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to tell the truth either since it would only start a fight and she didn't like arguing with Clark. It hurt something deep inside her when they disagreed. Are we really doing this tonight of all nights? After a moment of silence, Clark answered her. No. I'm sorry. If you're happy here then I'm happy for you. Just know you always have a place with me if you wanted. Before Sakura could reply, Clark paused as a finger tapped on Clark's shoulder. Sakura peered around Clark only to see his devious grin. If you don't mind, I'd like to steal her from you for a dance or 2 or 3. Sakura rolled her eyes and then fluttered them, saying in a sickly sweet voice, you can have every dance, Richard. Clark frowned, unhappy for reasons unknown. Richard chuckled and reached for her hand and pulled her close to him. Was seconds away from whisking her across the floor when Clark said, can I get an introduction first? The 3 of them quickly moved off to the side so as not to interrupt the dancing of others and continue their small talk. Richard held out his hand for Clark to shake. Richard Grayson. Clark Kent. I've heard of you. Richard's eyes flickered to Sakura who didn't notice. And tonight, gentlemen, I am Suki, so saith the illustrious Bruce Wayne. The throat cleared behind her and Sakura knew that she had been busted. Sakura turned around to see Bruce looking down at her with a raised brow, but she merely grinned, hoping to keep herself out of trouble. The look on Bruce's face told her it wasn't working. Richard, go mingle. I was just about to dance with Suki. Sakura nearly snorted at his hesitation at her name, but caught herself in time. Bruce's lips twitched, but he otherwise ignored Richard. He held out a hand to Clark which was immediately clasped and shook. Glad you could make it, Kent. Glad to be here. Unconsciously, his eyes drifted to Sakura after he uttered the words which didn't go unnoticed except by Sakura, who was too caught up in everything else that was going on to pay attention to the tension between the 3 men surrounding her. Although the reason for the tension did vary from person to person. Oh. There's Tim. I'll catch up with the 3 of you later. Sakura slipped away before any of the 3 men could grab her and met Tim, who was hovering near the food. He wore a slate gray tuxedo with a dark blue tie that did wonders for his eyes. He noticed her approach almost immediately and turned his head in her direction with a ready smile on his face. Really, Tim? A big grin graced Sakura's lips. Hiding by the food. You can't tell me it isn't a great spot to hide. Of course. Only the hungry people will find you. Tim laughed and made Sakura a small plate and passed it to her, which she accepted gladly. She grabbed something she couldn't identify and nibbled on it curiously, and her eyes widened at its deliciousness. You're very popular tonight. Sakura tossed Tim an odd look, not knowing what he meant. Well, all my friends are here, so not all. Sakura was momentarily saddened by not having Naruto and the others with her. Quickly, she shook off her nostalgia. She could brood some other time. When are you leaving? I don't know yet. I haven't exactly asked him would he take me. So then there's a chance you'll stay. She doubted it, but since there was a possibility that Hal could rescind his offer, Sakura nodded. You'll tell me as soon as you know for certain. You'll know before anyone else, Sakura promised. Sakura escaped the party, moving to the balcony for a little quiet amidst the chaos. She had no idea that Bruce was such a popular man. People were naturally drawn to his charisma and she found herself fascinated by it. Selena didn't stay by his side the whole night, but every now and then she saw the woman on Bruce's arm, and when she did they both looked happy. She really wanted to talk to Bruce about her. Maybe she'd have the opportunity before she left to find some brilliant way to bring up the subject. There you are. I've been looking for you. Sakura turned around and found her breath taken away. Being 6 feet tall, he towered over her, but that wasn't unusual since she was a small woman. What got her was that it wasn't until that moment that she realized how handsome he was. His dark brown eyes pierced through her, making her heart throb. He wore a white tuxedo with a red tie, and the contrast was striking. He grinned at her, and Sakura bit her bottom lip because her heart flipped in response to it. Why? Someone told me that you were looking for me. There was only one person who would, Bruce. Sakura nodded. I wanted to know if your offer to help me find my home was still on the table. His grin faded away and he reached for Sakura's hand and squeezed it lightly. Of course. Is it alright with you if we leave after the new year? Al nodded and Sakura sighed in relief. Her eyes gazed upward and her eyes happened to land on a mistletoe that was above them. Hal's gaze followed her own. Sakura, being the poison expert, couldn't help but spout a little knowledge. Did you know that mistletoe can be deadly if you eat it? Al didn't reply and Sakura let her gaze drift back into his eyes only to see a fire burning in his gaze. He moved closer to her and leaned down until his lips were dangerously close to her ear. The kiss can be even deadlier if you mean it. Hal's lips touched her cheek lightly and time stopped. Sakura wasn't sure when it started again, but when she came back to herself she was alone. She was certain she heard him say, "Merry Christmas, Sakura," before he walked away. Sakura soon heard the beating in the sky and she stiffened knowing that the very objects she had casted Genjutsu on earlier were in the sky in mass numbers. They were easily defeated before and she prepared herself to do the same once more. She raised her hands, but Batman grabbed her arm. She was about to wrench it away, but she didn't have to. He let her go of his own accord. Wait. Look. Sakura brought her eyes back to the skies, only to see that they weren't the ones being attacked. They were going after the kidnapping aliens. Sakura nodded her head glad they weren't alone any longer. Previously at STAR Labs. Silas Stone was in his lab, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the fact that he was working on a different project. At least a dozen other scientists surrounded him. They were studying a box of metal of a type that he had never before seen. He had so many questions about it and its origin. Where did it come from? Silas's question was answered by one of the newer scientists whose name he didn't know as yet. It was recovered from Superman's and his companions' battle this morning. Apparently, the creature had several of these boxes with him. We know for certain that one of them was destroyed. Silas frowned. Another superhuman had revealed themselves and it was one that they knew nothing of. If they went by the company she kept she was probably benign, but they couldn't afford to take that sort of chance. Is the companion Kryptonian, Sarah? Unlikely. She displays none of the abilities of the other female Kryptonian, nor that of Superman. Her strengths lie elsewhere. Such as? No data has come in yet, except that her physical strength is phenomenal. Isn't that a Kryptonian trait? There was a bit of hesitation before Sarah replied, yes Dr. Stone. They couldn't rule out that there was another Kryptonian among them then. They also couldn't rule out that if she was Kryptonian, then the Superman could now probably reproduce with another of its kind. They had been fortunate that the other was a relative. Now it seemed that their luck had run out. And did this belong to them? Not that we know of. It's actually hard to determine anything about the object including the metal that it's made of. He was aware of that, but he wasn't one to nitpick. We have, on the other hand, picked up some sort of signal broadcasting from it. And there's a similar broadcast coming from Central City, Coast City, and Washington, D.C. Silas eyed. And has anyone picked up the connection that those are all places of superhuman activity? Before the question could be answered they were interrupted Dr. Stone. Silas turned his head to the male addressing him. Your son is here. Silas ran his hand over his face. His son. Victor. His face flashed before his eyes. People said the boy looked just like him, but every time he saw his face, he was reminded of his mother. Tell him I'm busy. I don't have time right now. But he seemed pretty upset. Of course, he was and it probably had something to do with his idiotic football game. It typically always did. He had a feeling that he wasn't going to walk away easily. Send him up. Victor hated Star Labs. It was a place that was cold and impersonal. It was almost as bad as being in a hospital. He hated that it also reflected his father's personality nowadays. He turned his head and watched Silas Stone approach him and immediately called out to him. Dad. Victor, I'm in the middle of something important right now. Something more important than your own son. You promised me you'd be there today. There were scouts there who wanted me. I could have had a full scholar. But you wouldn't need. I can pay for your education. That isn't the point. Then what is the point, Victor? That you can run fast. That you can catch a ball. Open your eyes and take a look at the world around you. The world is changing into I don't know what. There are superhumans who are doing things that you would never dream of doing while running on your little field of dreams. Victor felt as if he had been smacked in the face. In truth, he would have preferred it if his father had actually physically hit him because the pain would have gone away faster. You're never going to come to one of my games. It wasn't a question. It was a statement since he was well aware of the truth of the matter. No, I'm not. Victor turned his back and began walking away for some foolish reason, hoping against hope that his father would call him back. What he actually heard was something that would change his life forever. Dr. Stone. Something is happening. Victor turned and looked over his shoulder to see his father walking back toward his lab. The expression on the face of the person who was sent to retrieve him is what caught his attention. He looked panicked and scared. What could possibly scare the man in a laboratory? Before he knew it, he was taking one step after another following in his father's footsteps. What he saw inside the lab his eyes couldn't make sense of. There was a box emitting flames and a loud ringing noise that hurt his ears and grew louder with each second. What kind of project was his father working on? Dad, what is that? His father's head snapped around, obviously not realizing that he had chosen to follow him. The naked fear on his face made Victor take a hesitant step back. Everyone get out. When Victor didn't move his father shouted, Victor leave now. But it was too late. The last thing Victor heard was his father screaming his name. Silas Stone held his son's burned, damaged, dying body in his hands and wondered where he had gone wrong. He blamed no one but himself. Had he just gone to his son's football game, he wouldn't have come to the lab to find him in the first place. He would have been safe away from the madness that had left him in his current state. Silas's vision grew blurry. He wasn't sure his mind could take it. He had already lost his wife. He couldn't lose his only son too. Victor. The anguished cry tore from his throat and tears streamed down his face. He cared nothing about the alien invaders that had just destroyed one of his laboratories. He didn't care that the human race could possibly be facing extinction. The only thing he cared about was Victor. Silas. Silas felt a hand on his shoulder but felt no comfort from human touch. It served as a reminder of the emptiness of his life. Your son is gone. We have to get out of here now. The words were cold and callous, and yet for some reason he wasn't offended by them. They didn't touch him at all. Maybe because he didn't quite believe them. Somewhere deep inside him hope still remained. I'm not going anywhere, Thomas. The grip on his shoulder tightened, but Silas didn't stop looking at his son's face. I already saw his mother die. I'm not going to lose him too. DGN Network. Lois Lane took a deep breath. Everyone was gone looking for safety and refuge from the alien invasion, and yet no one was reporting the truth of what was going on. The world was in chaos. She didn't put herself in the line of danger like she did in the past when she let herself be blinded by her infatuation of Superman. She worked behind the scenes now, and yet as she listened to the news reports coming in, she wasn't sure how much longer she could remain quiet. These portals are opening across the world and unleashing armies of monsters. These superhumans, these supermen are the cause of this. At the use of the word super, Lois' mind snapped to attention. No, she wouldn't let them blame Superman, of all people, for this. Metropolis knew that he was their salvation and not their damnation. There were just some things that she couldn't allow, just like there were some things worth fighting for. Lois took out her phone and dialed a number. Seconds later, when she heard a familiar male voice, she smiled. Jimmy, think you can make it to the TV station and record a live feed for me? Lois smiled at his response. It was almost like old times. Silas and Thomas carried his son deeper into STAR labs. The smell of destruction filled the air, but Silas was able to ignore it as he had a goal in mind. Dr. Stone, Sarah's soft voice questioned, where are we going? Sarah had joined them when she saw that they weren't going to blindly run and seek refuge. He wasn't sure why she joined them, and at the moment he wasn't concerned enough to care. We're taking him to the Red Room. Open the door for us. But I'm not authorized. He's getting heavy. Thomas interjected. If we don't do something soon, I'm going to drop him. Silas stifled his irritation and pressed onward. The door is open, Sarah. Security is offline. Just open the door so we can go inside. Sarah pushed the door open and was greeted with a loud screech that irritated the ears. Silas and Thomas filed in behind her, oblivious to Sarah's awe at the room around them. The room was nothing but metal, and the technology in it was abundant. Most of the things in the room Silas had no clue as to their purpose. But there was one thing he knew what it did, and he was almost certain he could operate it. Let's move. We shouldn't be in here, Dr. Stone. Thomas's hesitation was almost his undoing. He didn't understand, and a part of him was glad that he didn't. No one should have to live through the amount of pain he had. Lay him down. Silas and Thomas placed Victor in a nearby pod and then proceeded to give Sarah and Thomas instructions on how to turn it on. It would show them his vital signs and even go so far as to show his blood cell count and the structure of his DNA. He would have operated the equipment himself, but Victor reached for him and grabbed his hand. Silas couldn't stop the tears that flooded his eyes. His son, he wasn't gone yet, he hadn't been sure, but now he knew. Dad? His voice was hoarse, and Silas could tell that the effort to speak was costing him. I'm right here, Victor. It hurts. I know, but I'm going to help you. I won't let you die. Dr. Stone, whatever that energy is that blasted him, it's eating him away from the inside out. He's going into cardiac arrest. Silas moved swiftly to a locked metal container. He took the container and bashed it against a table, thereby breaking the lock. Thereafter, he discarded the lock, opened the container and pulled out a large hypodermic syringe. Then we can't wait. But the risk. The alternative is his death, which, if you didn't get it before, is unacceptable. I've studied everything about this technology and logged nearly everything in here. I've taken it apart and rebuilt it. It can save my son's life. It will save his life. Toward the end, he didn't know if he was trying to convince Thomas or himself. Silas injected the nanites into Victor's arm before anyone else tried to talk him out of it. If his body rejects the skin graft. It won't. I've injected the nanites. Activate them. But we haven't tested them. Just do it. Silas leaned down and covered his son's badly damaged face with a piece of metal that people would eventually come to associate Victor with. They were assaulted by another wave of alien invaders. So for the most part, conversation ended, but Sakura could never be accused of not being able to multitask. She moved to the one called Aquaman and asked, "Did you actually talk to those sharks?" "Yes. I told them what to eat." Their enemy didn't look the least bit appetizing, but then again, she wasn't a shark. Flash zipped to her side hitting foe after foe while quipping, "I hope they're still hungry, cause there's plenty more where they came from." A smile couldn't completely form on her face, she heard the Green Lantern called out, "Take cover." Before Sakura could make a move to do so her face was filled with the blue she had come to associate with Superman. Sakura heard several loud popping noises and was unsure as to what was going on. "Wah. They're shooting at all of us." Superman replied, answering her question and yet not answering it at all. She saw several of the creatures fall as some sort of weapon pierced their chests, but she had no idea what sort of weapon was being used. She was, on the other hand, aware that the friend in the skies she thought they had were actually foes. They weren't discriminating as to who they were shooting at. For all they cared, the whole lot of them could die. "Shooting what?" He frowned at her lack of knowledge. "Never mind that. Just stay behind me, use me as your shield. There are reports coming in that our city, Metropolis, is being invaded by aliens like Superman. Well, I'm here today to set the story straight. I stand here in the streets of Metropolis to tell you that these invaders are not like Superman. If they were, then right this second, I would feel safe and there would be no danger. But do you trust me? We do not fear Superman. He is our savior. We do not run away from him. If we are in danger we run to him. He and his companions are not the menace that the other television stations are portraying them to be. If Superman is out there, then he is doing what he can to protect us. But we know that, don't we, Metropolis?" Sakura pressed her lips together tightly. She knew the answer to that question, but at the moment she didn't like it. Sakura nodded her head. "Is it possible for you to follow my movements no matter what if I stay on the ground?" It was possible, but she was no Sharingan wielder. Doing something like that was an A-rank technique and required quite a bit of chakra. She had already taken a Solider pill once and was well aware that if she didn't die before the battle was done, she was going to collapse after it was finished. She hadn't even fought this hard in the war. There are those of you who may think that I'm biased, however the fact that I am even alive today is a testament to Superman's nobility. So I say to you, trust Superman. Trust those who stand with him today. Because he will do whatever he can to keep us safe. But we already knew that, didn't we, Metropolis? Still, she had a feeling that if she wasn't able to do something she would end up being seriously injured. Sakura looked up into Superman's worried visage and considered lying. She was tired. They had been fighting all day and under normal circumstances, she was certain she would have been able to keep up, but before she had arrived in this strange new world, she had been embroiled in a war and she hadn't been sitting on the sidelines idly. It was true that she had perfect chakra control, but the whole waste not, want not philosophy didn't apply in this situation. In this situation the world was ending. "I can't move like you, Superman, nor have I trained with you, so I'm not familiar with your style." "I'll protect you then." That didn't sit well with her. In fact, it rankled more than a little. Staying on the sidelines being protected by some man. Why did that sound so familiar? Sakura blinked, slowly coming to a realization. It was so familiar because it was the story of her life and she was sick of it. Was she of no use to anyone? Did she have no backbone whatsoever? Did she not have the gumption to stand and fight to the bitter end, whatever it may be? Sakura shook her head at Superman. "No. I still have some fight left in me. I'll protect myself, but I'll do it my way. Just cover me until I disappear and do what you can to stop them. They're only making a bad situation worse." Superman locked eyes with Sakura for a moment. She could tell he wanted to ask her what she was going to do, but he was intelligent enough to know they didn't have time for explanations. So after what seemed like an eternity Superman nodded, finally saying, "All right." He thereafter watched as Sakura's fingers moved rapidly and she sank into the ground right before his eyes. Sakura could tell that he didn't believe in her. That he was scared for her. That was fine because realistically speaking, she was scared for herself. She didn't know if what she was planning was going to work. She couldn't see the future and she didn't want to die in a world where no one knew her. She didn't want her friends to wonder what had become of her and to never have closure. But she also didn't want to be a coward. She wanted to live well, fight well, and if push came to shove she wanted to die well. Alternate dimension. Several years after Sakura's arrival in the New 52. Sakura walked into Wayne Manor looking for its master. Her steps were quick and light as she was happy to be home. She didn't get to visit as often as she would have liked. Although, she could admit the place would never be the same since Alfred had passed away, but that didn't mean she couldn't still feel his presence. She could still hear him calling her, Miss Sakura, even after she practically begged him not to do it anymore. Sakura could still imagine him raising his chin and with a dignity only known to a Pennyworth saying, "No." Sakura chuckled to herself. She loved that man dearly. She had been in this world for 15 years and now she would never leave it for anything. Her life had changed so much and so many things happened that shaped her into the woman she was today. If she could go back and redo things she didn't think she would. BB? Sakura called out wondering where her old man was. Although, if he knew she called him an old man in her mind, he'd beat her senseless to prove he was still very much a virile man. She was about to call out again when a woman slinked in front of her from the shadows. Bruce is busy with a guest right now. Sakura smiled at Selena by way of greeting and nodded. Business or pleasure? A bit of both perhaps. Sakura knew immediately Selena was hiding something, wanting to see her reaction to whatever it was. It was a game the two of them played to see who would flinch first. Sakura's smile widened. She was always willing to play. Take me to him? Of course. Selena turned and walked away, and Sakura followed her mind awash in memories of her youth spent there with Tim, Damien, and Richard. She still remembered that first Christmas party where Richard teased her all right long and stolen her attention from other members of the league. Sakura grinned. Those were happy times. Sakura shook her head clearing away the memories and entered the dining room. Her eyes immediately landed on DP and oddly enough another DP. Sakura's eyes widened. To Bruce Wayne. How was that possible? Henge. Was Kakashi playing games with her? She immediately moved closer in order to inspect the situation. She would have circled the two like a bird of prey, but one of the men had grabbed her arm making her focus. Her eyes sharpened and she gazed at the man. She saw that his face was older yet handsome and one she was familiar with, but when she turned and looked at the other, who now that she was paying attention, appeared to be younger. She happened to see Selena out the corner of her eye, grinning like the cat that ate the canary. Ah, so this was her game. She was tickled that there were two Bruce Wayne. BB? What's going on? Before Bruce could reply they were joined by another presence of the ninja persuasion. I always thought one of you was enough. Now we must deal with two. Sakura swung her head around at Kakashi's timely arrival. You didn't do this. Why in the world would I make a henge of the bat? He had a point there. Kakashi and Batman weren't exactly fond of each other, but they tolerated each other for her sake. Bruce didn't approve of her relationship with Kakashi, but she would never send him away. His presence kept the will of fire alive within her. As long as Kakashi was around, she'd never forget her roots. Sakura returned her attention to the other Bruce Wayne, who was watching her steadily. Who is he? Sakura whispered. Who is she? The other Bruce asked. Her DB said, this is my daughter, Sakura. The younger Bruce raised an eyebrow and said, isn't she a little old to be your daughter? Sakura, drop the henge. DB commanded. Sakura sighed and obeyed, revealing her true form. She watched as the young Bruce's eyes grew large as he took her in. I can't stay like this for long. Sakura warned and Bruce nodded and finally answered her question. He's from another dimension. An alternate Earth. Sakura turned and looked at the younger Bruce, her mouth forming a small O. How old are you? Sakura inquired. He looked like he didn't want to answer, but there was something about Sakura's imploring gaze that made him do so. 22. So you haven't met me yet. Sakura said and turned and looked at the older Bruce. DB nodded. So he doesn't know about the battle with? No. Bruce said, cutting her off, but I believe that's why he's here. Kakashi moved deeper into the room and took a seat at the table, pulling out his favorite novel, not at all bothered by the fact that there were two of the same men in their midst. Or rather, if he was bothered at all it was probably because it was a duplicate of Bruce Wayne. Selena began helping herself to the food that was on the table, and the look of smug satisfaction was still on her face. Sakura said nothing, not even bothering to hide her bewilderment. Selena got her this time with the oddity factor, but the next time she would make sure she wasn't able to. Who is her mother? The younger Bruce asked, because I don't recall. Sakura moved closer to the younger Bruce and stared into his face amazed beyond words. My mother isn't the important part of this story. What is important is why you're here. Care to enlighten us? Younger Bruce's eyes narrowed and she knew he didn't trust her or any of them. He looked at the older version of himself who raised a brow. I trust no one in this room as much as I trust Sakura. Thank you so much, beloved. Selena sniffed and Bruce smirked. He was well aware that Selena was currently teasing Sakura. He couldn't help but give her a little taste of her own medicine. If anyone can help you, Sakura can. She has a bit of experience with this type of thing. The younger Bruce frowned, wondering what he meant, but decided to take a leap of faith. After all, if you can't trust yourself, who could you trust? Her name is Kaio. She can body hop. She brought me and some caped monster in blue and red here for some reason. Blue and red? Sakura inquired and looked at DB, who nodded. A slow smile started to spread on Sakura's lips. I'd pay money to see that. BB frowned at her, and Sakura focused her mind sharpening on what the younger Bruce said. You said, Kaio. The Chaos Bringer? The younger Bruce frowned. The Chaos Bringer? What do you mean? Sakura sighed, thinking of the revelations of her past and how she came to lose her homeworld. It means that trouble comes your way. In her wake comes destruction. She's testing to see whether or not you can survive it. Destruction, in the form of. Sakura shook her head. It doesn't matter if I tell you or not. You won't remember in the end. She'll take your memories when she sends you back. Then why not tell me? The younger Bruce inquired if it really doesn't matter. Sakura smiled since he made a valid point. They call him Lord Darkseid of Apocalypse. He comes to destroy everything you love and burn your world eternally. You've fought him before. Younger Bruce said, catching on, you survived it. How? Through faith and trust in those near us. Sakura looked at the older Bruce who nodded. That blue and red monster is your best bet at survival. You'll have to trust him. Younger Bruce's eyes narrowed and Sakura could tell there was no way that was going to happen and suddenly had an idea of how to help. Do you trust that I am your daughter? You look nothing like me. The younger Bruce retorted and Sakura snorted. And I wouldn't allow my daughter to dye her hair pink. DB smirked and Kakashi outright laughed. There's a story behind the hair, Bruce darling. Selena assured, ignoring her husband's irritated frown at her calling another man her darling. You'll know soon enough. Say I do believe you are my daughter. How would you help me save my world? If you allow it, I'll give you a memory that Kaya won't be able to take away from you. The only person who'll even know it's there eventually will be me. Sakura and the younger Bruce stared into each other's eyes, weighing each other silently. After a while he nodded his head and Sakura's fingers moved swiftly, confusing the younger Bruce as to what she was doing. When she was done, her hands glowed green as she brought a finger to his forehead and poked him gently. The younger Bruce felt no change and yet her hands had glowed green. Was it magic? What did you do? What will I remember? Sakura saw no harm in telling him part of it anyway. Green eyes, pink hair, loyalty, and a love for you that is deep, strong, and unshakable. With that, Sakura moved to her Bruce, dropped a kiss on his cheek, and headed out the door. Come on, Kaka-sensei. Sakura said as she put her disguise back into place. I have a feeling I need to find a guy in blue and enlighten him before my sweetie and I have our hot Valentine's Day date. Kakashi rolled his eyes and gave Bruce a sneer. I still can't believe you let her marry him. If I had known it would irritate you this much, I would have encouraged it sooner. Both men smiled unpleasantly at each other before Kakashi followed after Sakura. Selena rose shortly thereafter, claiming she had a thing or two to do, leaving the two Bruce alone. The younger Bruce stared at the empty doorway for a few seconds before asking, why does she call you DB? Bruce chuckled fondly at the nickname that Sakura had given him. Because she's slightly insane and I don't think I'd have it any other way. Soon after Sakura disappeared, Superman made a decision. Sakura was right. They couldn't just allow the army to keep shooting at them. Worst case scenario, Sakura or Batman were going to end up dead. In all honesty, an accident could probably kill Flash and the Green Lantern as well. He wasn't about to allow that to happen. We have to shut them down. Flash, the person closest to him, heard him speak. At a glance, Superman could tell his words were not received well. That didn't make them any less honest though, and the sooner the Flash accepted it the better. Shut them down? What do you mean shut them down? They're soldiers who are just doing their job. And their job is to shoot at us. What have we done to them, Flash? Am I wrong, or are we trying to protect the people just like they are? Before Flash could come up with some sort of reply, Superman took to the skies, but he did make one parting remark. You seem like someone who wants to do the right thing, but the same can't always be said for everyone in authority positions. Keep that in mind while you stay here and dodge. Superman didn't need any additional senses to know that the Flash was following him. Where's Kunoichi? Green Lantern asked, looking around. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen her. Worry churned in his gut, especially since he could see Superman in the distance, and her splash of pink hair was obviously nowhere near him, nor was it near the Batman that she had taken a liking to. I have not seen her since the shooting began. Wonder Woman replied, and GL frowned. Did she run? Green Lantern couldn't help but think about how she said she was a ninja. Nothing he knew of ninja painted them in a positive light. He didn't want to think badly of her. She had, after all, healed his arm when he had been something of a bastard about it. Still, she was no longer among them, and if she hadn't run away then it could mean she was in trouble, and that thought didn't sit well with him either. Batman snorted as if he knew something that GL didn't. She's not that type of girl. And you know her so well after a few hours in her presence. Sarcasm colored Green Lantern's words, but Batman ignored it. I'm a good judge of character. Green Lantern weighed his words silently. Are you saying you trust her? I'm saying if she's not here then she probably has a good reason, like not being bulletproof. You're not bulletproof and you're still here. Yeah, but I'm Batman. Green Lantern stared at Batman incredulously, wondering what in the world that was supposed to mean and what relevance it had to anything. When enlightenment didn't descend on him he decided to just ignore it. He then noticed Flash and Superman taking out the helicopters and knew they could use some backup since they weren't injuring the people inside. They were just taking away their toys. GL smirked. Alright, I'm going to get the people out of the helicopters and to safety, but not because it's the right thing to do. I just like impressing people. Green Lantern noticed Batman just staring at him. What? Wait. What did I just say? GL's face began to turn a fascinating color of red. He knew exactly what he had just said, but he didn't know why he said it. You were touching my lasso. What that had to do with anything he hadn't a clue. It makes people tell the truth. Green Lantern snatched his hand away from Wonder Woman's lasso, wondering how his hand had gotten so close to her in the first place since it was on her hip. She looked like the type of woman to knock a man out for laying hands on her. Apparently he had judged her wrong, or maybe he had already received his punishment. Laughter reached his ears soon afterward. It's not funny, Batman. He received no reply, which only served to irritate Green Lantern more. Water surged upward and into the sky, forming a monster shape that chilled the bones. Superman looked down at the water, knowing instinctively who had taken a page out of Green Lantern's handbook and made a water dragon surge upward from the seas. He hoped she wasn't going to kill them or try to. He didn't want to have to fight her too. His thought process quickly shifted as he watched the water snake through the helicopters, washing their pilots out of them. He swiftly moved, catching them so that they didn't fall to their deaths. His eyes glanced toward Sakura, wondering if she had some sort of affinity with water. First, she had walked on water, now this. It couldn't be a coincidence. Whoa. Flash yelled, seeing that the water had developed a mind of its own and immediately began to backtrack. He looked around for Aquaman, wondering whether or not he had some part in all of this, but noted he was still on land with the others. It's okay, Superman reassured him. It's Kunoichi controlling the dragon. How do you know that? I don't see her. That was because she had concealed herself in the shadows where no ordinary person would notice her. But he didn't have ordinary eyes. Trust me. I know. STARR, Labs. A surge of power surged through Victor Stone's body, causing him to cry out in pain. He thought he heard someone call out his name, but his own pain drowned it out. However, as quickly as the pain started, it changed in intensity and form, causing him to open his eyes. Ada flowed into his mind a swift rate and he struggled to his feet. His steps felt funny and he felt nothing. Dad's voice was hoarse and he doubted anyone could hear him, but he tried again. I can't feel my legs, my arms, my hands. Victor took that moment to look down and discover that his hands, once a rich dark milk chocolate, now had a shiny metallic edge to them. He screamed. The doors to the Red Room blew open and the most horrifying creatures Victor had ever seen poured into the room. He heard a woman scream, but a quick glance at her told him she wasn't in immediate danger yet, but he was. The creatures rushed towards him as he heard a voice whisper inside in his head. Defense mode. Reconfiguring. Victor's arm raised almost of its own volition. He tried to fight and force it back down, but to no avail. His eyes widened in horror as words no one else could hear continued to resound within his mind. White noise cannon enabled. Victor's arm reassembled itself and formed a cannon that incinerated the creatures that surrounded them. The woman uttered words filled with fear, but Victor was distracted by his own reflection. His body was covered almost completely in metal. Very little of his skin remained visible. His brow furrowed in confusion. What happened to him? He looked around, panicked. The last thing he remembered was visiting his father at his lab and the explosion. Was that where he was? STARR Labs. Did his father know what happened? Could he help him figure out what was going on and get him back to normal? Dad? A brief stab of fear claimed him. Was he still alive? Had he accidentally killed him? Are you here? Silas Stone stepped out from behind ruined pieces of equipment. I'm here. Victor's terrified eyes swung to his father. He took a step forward, but the sound of metal clinking against the ground startled him and made him freeze. Dad. What happened to me? What am I? Silas stepped closer to Victor and reached up and placed a hand on his shoulder. He squeezed Victor's shoulder tightly in reassurance that was wasted because Victor couldn't feel his touch. It was something that he had been robbed of. You're my son. Victor continued to stare at his father uncomprehendingly. You were going to die. Silas said gently. This was my only way to save you. At first Victor's mind protected him, refusing to understand the words that had been uttered. They surely couldn't mean what he thought. However, when Silas continued to gaze at him steadily, a pain from somewhere deep within began to spread through him that was seconds away from driving him mad. You did this to me. It was only then that Silas Stone realized that there could be repercussions for his actions. It was only then that he realized that his son could still be alive and he could still lose him. All he saw was his own pain and it blinded him terribly, and yet he couldn't find it in himself to regret what he had done. I couldn't let you go. It was too much all at once for Victor. His father had turned him into some sort of monster the likes of which would horrify even Frankenstein. He couldn't even stand to look at him. He couldn't stand to look at himself. Victor wished he had just let him die. "You did this to me?" He questioned once more just to make sure he understood. In his question he put all the venom and disgust he felt in his voice. When Silas Stone stared at his son unwaveringly, Victor ran off. It was answer enough for him. "Victor, wait. Let me explain." But it was too little, too late. A little while later, on his escape from his father, he discovered some information that would become important that Sakura's ragtag team know. The Kunoichi rejoined the others and the fight continued on. Sakura didn't see an end in sight. It was somewhat disheartening. If this was what war was like in this world, then she prayed to the gods for peace. Out the corner of her eyes, she saw something bearing down upon them quickly. It had a metallic gleam to it that alarmed her, making her think that the aliens were upping the ante with their creatures. She yelled out, "Watch out!" and somehow managed to capture Green Lantern's attention. "I got this one." He called out and grabbed the creature and hauled it up into the air. "Wait, Lantern!" Batman yelled. "It's not one of them. Don't hurt him." "What are you talking about?" Green Lantern questioned, but lowered the creature to the ground. However, once he got a closer look at him, he realized simultaneously with Sakura that it wasn't a creature, but rather a man. "It's just a kid in armor," Aquaman uttered. Sakura came closer and studied him briefly before raising a hand allow her chakra to glow green. She sensed something within him, something foreign, and yet it was alive. It was something she didn't understand and hadn't ever seen before. Sakura shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think it's armor. I think it's him. It's who he is." Sakura whispered and couldn't help but be partially horrified. This wasn't normal. Who had done this to him and why? Wonder Woman approached him and grabbed his hand gently. "Who are you? Do you need help?" "We all do. He's coming. He's coming here. They go from world to world. We have to stop him before he destroys everything." It was in those moments that a loud ringing occurred, followed by a bright blinding light. Sakura turned her head away in an effort to protect her vision, but it was of little use. "Kunoichi, get behind me." Sakura frowned at Superman, irritated that he wanted her to continue to use him as a shield. He wasn't a weapon. He was a person, and even though it seemed like he was invulnerable, there had to be something he couldn't face. With those thoughts in mind, Sakura moved toward Superman and stood at his side. Superman made a move to grab her, but Sakura softly told him, "No." Superman hesitated and dropped his arm down to his side. For some reason, the simple action of his just listening to her made her extraordinarily happy. It was a happiness that faded quickly as she heard the darkly uttered words, "I am Darkseid." Sakura had never seen the likes of what she was looking at. His mere presence was terrifying. Malice and menace rolled off him in waves. He was scarier than even Orochimaru, and that was saying something because she still vividly recalled from her childhood running into the man in the forest of death. His eyes glowed an eerie red, and his face appeared to be carved out of granite. She wasn't sure whether or not what he was wearing was armor or just him, but it didn't matter. It didn't diminish his aptitude for creepy. "I'm guessing that's the bad guy." Sakura turned her head and gave Green Lantern an incredulous look that he merely shrugged off. If the situation hadn't been so serious, she probably would have chuckled. But it was that serious, and she was surprised no one had pissed their pants. "But guess." Batman replied, and Sakura very nearly smacked herself in frustration. Instead, she raised her head and looked up at Superman, who had the nerve to smile down at her. "You're all insane." Flash appeared at her side and draped an arm over her shoulder. "Sanity is overrated. Think about what we're dealing with and tell me that again," Sakura muttered. And then an explosion occurred that knocked Sakura unconscious again. She was really tired of being knocked out. When she came to, it was in time to hear the Flash yelling, "No. Stop." Right as one of their fancy flying machines exploded in the sky. Sakura opened her bleary eyes, wondering what happened and why she felt like she had been hit with a few bricks a million or so times. "Ugh, eyes. Anyone else awake yet? I'm not that good at making chichit." Sakura sat up slowly. "Flash, what's going on?" And then Sakura remembered that their enemy had graced them with his presence. A few expletives fell from her lips, and then she heard Superman's voice from somewhere nearby. "I'm up, but not to talk." Sakura turned her head to see Superman throwing rubble off his person. She made her way to her feet as well, although she wasn't able to hold back a few aching groans. "Where is he?" Sakura asked, and then she raised her chin and looked up. He towered over her, and while that wasn't unusual for Sakura this time, it was just ridiculous. Her eyes were round and large, and she tried to think of something to say, but came up with nothing. She understood then why small talk was beyond the Flash. "What exactly do you say to that?" Sakura found the answer to that question to be nothing when his eyes swung in her direction. She saw something flicker in his gaze as he stared at her before his eyes started to glow with something other than happiness. Sakura was certain he wasn't about to play nice with her. "Kunoichi." "Superman." Flash screamed and grabbed them both and started running. I need you two to move it. It only took seconds for Superman to get himself together and start running, but Flash didn't wait for Sakura to come to terms with the fact that they were being attacked. He lifted her up into his arms and ran. Sakura squeezed her eyes shut because moving at the type of speed the Flash was capable of wasn't exactly fun for her stomach. Seeing him move and feeling him do it was two different things. Seeing him move, on an intellectual level she could understand he was moving really quickly. However, feeling him move was unreal. No one moved like he did, and it was nothing like flying in Superman's arms. "Give Sakura to me," Superman said from their side, moving up into the air and flying instead of running. "We'll split up so his beams can only chase one of us." "Sakura." Flash looked down at the woman in his arms. "Your name is Sakura?" Sakura sighed resigned. She honestly couldn't believe he blew her cover like that. When all this was over with she was going to give him a piece of her mind. "Yes. I'm Barry." Her eyes popped open at the admission. She thought they only used their code names. Why was he telling her his name? Wasn't anonymity important for them? Or at least it was what she had come to believe. "Flash." Superman's stern voice broke Sakura out of her stupor and caused her to raise her arms up to allow Superman take her, but Barry only moved faster. "No, if I slow down to pass her to you, we take the risk of being hit, and I don't know about you, but I want to stay in one piece." Sakura did too, so she lowered her arms and motioned for Superman to go on without her. He nodded his head curtly and did as she asked. Sakura shifted and used chakra to hold herself to Barry. She didn't relish the thought of accidentally flying out of his arms and dying a stupid death. Superman went higher into the air and Sakura chanced to glance behind Barry. The beams that they spoke of split up, thwarting their plan, one chasing each of them, and Sakura turned to the skies and noticed that Superman was hesitating in the sky, looking back at her, obviously worried. Her heart stopped. This wasn't going to end well. The beams had a chance of hitting all of them even though they had gone separate ways. "Barry. You have to hurry." Flash glanced down at Sakura. "I'm not known for moving slowly, Sakura." Sakura ignored the fact that maybe he had a point. "You have to get something in the way of the beam so that it hits that instead of us." "Good idea. Find a different target." It was then that Flash took note of a few alien creatures on the ground making mischief. Bingo. Flash ran their way, hesitated for a second around the aliens, giving them time to notice their presence, as well as giving Darkseid's beams a chance to catch up with them, and then he kept going. A loud boom sounded, letting them both know they had escaped Darkseid's attack at the price of his own people. The Flash could feel the heat from the blast on his back, but it was nothing compared to the heat elsewhere. Barry glanced down at Sakura to make sure she was okay. When she gave him a shaky grin he set her down on the ground. She wobbled for a second before looking back at the raging flames that could have been them, but wasn't. "You are really fast." "I can be slow with certain things." Sakura rolled her eyes, but couldn't help but chuckle. It seemed she couldn't escape perverts no matter where she went. "We should head back. Regroup with the others." Sakura chose that moment to raise her head and look up in the sky. A scream erupted from her throat before she could stop it. Flash quickly looked up to see what had so alarmed Sakura, only to see Darkseid's beam go right through Superman. "Superman!" Flash yelled, his panicked face matching Sakura's. "I can't fly. I can't get to him." Sakura couldn't fly either. She couldn't reach him either. Although that wasn't what bothered her the most. If she could list them it would be in this order. Number 3, she should have been in the sky with him. She knew how wrong that sounded, but she knew, somehow, that if she had been with him he would have paid more attention. She had seen him hesitating earlier, and if she had been with him then maybe he would have been more focused on the task at hand. Or the blast that would have been targeted to hit her instead, and somehow Superman would have kept that from happening. Number 2, he was injured in the first place. She had seen the man walk through fire. He flew. He told her she could use him as a shield. A man like that just didn't go down easily unless his opponent was a force to be reckoned with. Number 1, he didn't fall and hit the ground. He was captured by the aliens that had been bombarding them. And she was freaking out. They were taking away the man who saved her life, who had been with her ever since she had come to this world. A thread of fear slid down her spine. He was gone. The man who this world called Super had been taken down in a matter of seconds, and she had done absolutely nothing to help. She felt like her heart was being ripped out of her chest, and she found herself tilting her head and screaming at the skies in an anguished cry. "Superman!